Hey guys, tonight we're diving nose first into one of the strangest and most oddly poetic scientific debates in history. What did electricity smell like to the people who first began to harness it? You're in an old, flickering candlelit lab. The floor creaks underfoot, glass bottles line the shelves, and copper wires snake across the table like tangled ivy. In front of you sits a strange contraption, something between a torture device and a toy. A Leiden jar hums softly. The air is sharp, tinged with something. What is that? Burn air? Fresh rain? Rotten eggs? You lean in, and then zap. A crackle, a pop, and a smell. You jolt back, not from the shock, but because it smells weird. But here's the problem. You're not quite sure what it smells like. And if you ask 10 people in this room, you get 10 different answers. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and local time in the comments. I love knowing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward in time to the mid-1700s. Electricity, at this point, is a curiosity, a parlor trick, something gentlemen of leisure fiddle with between rounds of port and debates over which powdered wig is more dignified. But beneath the showmanship, something stranger stirs. People keep reporting that electricity has a smell. This shouldn't be surprising, except it kind of is. Electricity, as you understand it today, doesn't really smell. Sure, ozone has a sharp tang, and burnt wires give off that acrid note of melted plastic and regret. But back then, there were no plastic wires or modern devices. It was raw, generated by spinning glass, rubbing amber, or discharging sparks from jars charged with invisible forces. And somehow, those sparks brought smells with them. Some described it as metallic, like iron freshly filed. Others claimed it was the scent of rain hitting dry stone. A few said it was sweet. More said sulfur. One unfortunate soul wrote, it was like freshly crushed seaweed beneath a dying moonlight, which sounds poetic until you realize he might have just had moldy seaweed in the lab. You step inside one such lab. The air is thick with anticipation and tobacco. A gentleman, his wig slightly crooked and eyes wild with excitement, rubs a rod against a pelt until it crackles. He brings it close to his face, sniffs, then beams. You smell that, he whispers. Electric fire. His assistant leans in, sniffs, and frowns. Sir, smells like cabbage. This is how the debate begins, not with a bang, but with a sniff. The earliest records show scientists mentioning the smell of electrical effluvia, a fancy term for the vapor or essence they believed electricity released. This wasn't just poetic musing. Some scientists were dead serious that electrical activity released actual, smellable particles into the air. Historians still argue whether this belief was grounded in genuine observation or just the overexcited noses of Enlightenment thinkers. After all, labs then were filled with smoke, open flames, and curious mixtures. Any spark might stir up a dozen other scents. But to these early explorers, the smell meant something. They cataloged it, argued about it. Some wrote entire treatises trying to describe it. One German natural philosopher even carried a sealed bottle of charged air with him, insisting it retained the electrical scent for weeks. Spoiler, it didn't. The fact that they were even arguing about this is kind of beautiful. You're standing at the edge of modern science, but things are still just mystical enough to seem magical. A whiff of mystery, literally, can spark a year-long correspondence between scientists across Europe. You find yourself listening in on one such letter. Dear Sir, upon charging the jar this morning, I noted again the peculiar aroma. Sharp, invigorating, and strangely metallic. I suspect this is the soul of the electrical fire made manifest. Yours in vapor and voltage. F.H. von Kopp. Some of these scholars really thought they were sniffing the essence of the universe, which is kind of adorable, honestly. One fringe thinker even argued that if you could bottle and sniff the scent of electricity daily, it would ward off melancholia. He called it vital vapor therapy. Others weren't buying it. A rival wrote, Sir, if I wish to smell burnt hair and ozone, I need only attend my cousin's violin recitals. Burn. As you explore deeper into the world of 18th century science, you realize that these scent debates weren't just about noses. They were about truth, about reality. If electricity had a smell, it meant it was doing something physical, changing the air, interacting with the world. That mattered. It gave weight to theories about vital forces, life, energy, even the soul. But the more noses that sniffed, the more confusion arose. Some claimed the smell was only present when metal was involved. Others said it only happened in humid weather. One eccentric insisted it was strongest during thunderstorms, but only if you'd eaten onions beforehand. That last one may have just had halitosis. Still, you lean in, imagining yourself in that candlelit lab, nose tingling, eyes wide. You don't know it yet, but you're about to step into a decades-long feud that will pit rational thinkers against fringe philosophers, and all because nobody could agree what electricity smelled like, or if it even smelled at all. You're standing in a smoky drawing room now, somewhere in London or Leipzig, or perhaps just the back parlor of a curious noble's estate. It's the mid-1700s again, and everyone is buzzing with excitement, quite literally. You glance around. Gentlemen with flushed cheeks and too tight cravats are lining up, sleeves rolled, ready to try the latest marvel of science, getting shocked for fun. Someone brings out the machine. It looks like a wooden box mated with a windmill and a thunderstorm. A static generator, probably a glass cylinder turned by a crank, rubbing against leather pads. A Leyden jar stands nearby, glowing with invisible menace. The operator, usually a university student or enthusiastic baron, gestures toward the first volunteer. The man places one hand on the jar and the other on a brass rod. Someone shouts, "Now!" The crank turns. Sparks fly. And then, crack! A jolt shoots through his body. He leaps back, gasps, laughs nervously, and says the line that will become oddly familiar. Did anyone else smell that? You're now part of the earliest experiments with artificial electricity. Static discharges and stored charges used not only to explore the boundaries of physics, but also to provoke intense debate about what exactly people were experiencing, and why the air smelled weird after. The smell came up again and again in journals and letters. Not just once or twice, but repeatedly across countries and decades. Some likened it to burning metal. Others said it was like the air after a lightning storm, which modern noses now know is probably ozone. But ozone hadn't been identified yet. So they were left guessing. There's something deeply human about this phase of science. Instead of meters and sensors, people use their bodies as instruments. I feel tingling in the fingertips. There's a metallic taste in my mouth. My hair is rising. And of course, I smell something. Every experiment became a full-body event. The popular electric shock demonstrations were the 18th century equivalent of TikTok science stunts. It was trendy. At social gatherings, people shocked their guests for entertainment. You imagine a group huddled around a lady in a velvet gown, daring her to touch the charged rod. She flinches, shrieks with laughter, and fans herself. Someone asks, "Did you smell that?" She nods, confused and exhilarated. Like violets and something sharp. Historians still argue whether these reports came from actual olfactory sensations or were simply suggested by the theatrics of the moment. Was it real, or was it psychosomatic? Expectation shaping perception? Fringe theory time. Some early scientists thought the body itself released scent under electric stress, that the smell wasn't coming from the spark, but from you. Odor of burnt skin. They wrote ominously, though perhaps a touch overdramatically. And then there were the DIY scientists, clergy, teachers, watchmakers, who built crude devices at home. Without standardized equipment, every experiment smelled slightly different. One man in Vienna claimed his device smelled like snow on stone. Another insisted it produced the scent of apple peels and smoke. One cheeky Italian noble claimed he got a whiff of a good Chianti, but may have just been drunk. One lesser-known French doctor believed electricity's odor came from its effect on air molecules, causing vibrations in the ether, which he thought were smellable. He named the scent Essence Électrique. There were even rumors of bottled electric air being sold in Paris for ladies to inhale between dances. No one agreed on what it smelled like. A few said it was mostly just vinegar. You pause here, noting how genuinely unsure they were, and how stubborn. Once a scientist staked his claim on what electricity smelled like, he defended it as if it were his honor, his fortune, and his dog, all rolled into one. Back in England, the Royal Society debated it more formally. A Mr. Witherspoon presented a short paper arguing that the scent was merely the byproduct of singed cloth or hair when the sparks jumped. He was heckled by another member who claimed to have smelled the same scent without any burning, thus proving it was the electricity itself. That man, Lord Fenbury, later tried to convince the group that electricity could be tasted in one's teeth, a theory still awaiting peer review. You imagine yourself sitting in on that debate, trying not to laugh. Some gentlemen take notes. Others sniff at air samples. One fellow wafts a feather over his nose and sniffs deeply. Another takes a pinch of snuff and mutters, "Definitely sulfur." It's a chaotic kind of charm. Science, still in its experimental teenage years. And all this happened before electricity was properly understood, before electrons were even named. It was a force, a mystery. To the Enlightenment mind, anything this mysterious had to have a smell. Fire had a smell. Wine had a smell. Life had a smell. So surely electricity did too. You find yourself wondering, if we didn't already know what electricity shouldn't smell like, might we still imagine it does? The weirdest part? They were almost right. We now know that electrical discharges can produce ozone, O3, a sharp, clean scent often associated with lightning. It happens when high voltage breaks apart oxygen molecules. So yes, there is some real smell in the air after a zap. The nose knew something was there. It just didn't have the vocabulary yet. Still, no two noses agreed. And so you lean back as another curious noble takes a turn with the generator. The crank spins, the spark leaps, and someone nearby says once more, "You know, I think it smells like almonds." And the argument continues. You find yourself now in the company of lightning. Real, wild, sky-born lightning. And the man most famously obsessed with it, Benjamin Franklin. It's not yet the famous kite experiment, but rather a dim workshop filled with glass jars, brass keys, and ideas bold enough to get someone seriously fried. Franklin's experiments, like many of his contemporaries, weren't just about figuring out what electricity did. They were about what it was. And part of that puzzle, odd as it sounds now, was whether lightning, and by extension, all electricity, had a smell. On one rain-heavy afternoon, you walk alongside Franklin through a garden. He eyes the clouds like they owe him money, then points up and says something like, "Nature's laboratory is open for business." Franklin believed electricity wasn't a separate force, but the very same stuff that crackled in your hair, shocked your fingers, and boomed in thunder. The kite experiment you've probably heard of was just one in a long series of daring, some might say reckless, attempts to prove lightning and laboratory sparks were one and the same. And while he didn't write much about scent, others around him did. Several witnesses to his experiments reported a distinct sharpness in the air after a strike, something like vinegar and burnt straw. One assistant even claimed his nose hairs curled from the pungency. Franklin, ever skeptical of anything too poetic, waved this off. But secretly, he probably smelled it too. There's this moment you imagine. Franklin staring at the sky, raindrops soaking his hat, lightning crackling nearby. He closes his eyes, sniffs the air, and wonders, not about power or danger, but about smell. A scent that feels ancient, electric, and somehow alive. Here's the twist. Some of his rivals weren't convinced that lightning was even related to laboratory electricity. They thought he was romanticizing it, forcing connections. And more than one of them sniffed the air after a lightning strike and said, "Well, it doesn't smell like my Leyden jar." This debate over scent became part of a broader divide. Was electricity a universal essence, the same everywhere? Or did it differ based on its source, its strength, or even its mood? Yes, mood. One Parisian scholar wrote that electricity had emotional character, ranging from angry sulfur to melancholy brass. Historians still argue whether these scent descriptions were metaphorical or taken literally. When someone described the mournful aroma of spent current, were they being poetic, or had their lab just caught fire? Back to Franklin. The kite experiment, wild as it was, involved a key tied to a wet string. The goal was to collect electrical charge from a storm cloud, and it worked. The key sparked, but witnesses also reported a strange smell in the air, metallic, dry, and cold, yet biting. One onlooker even wrote, "It reminded me of air in the cellars beneath old cathedrals." You chuckle. People in the 18th century could turn anything into a haunted simile. Here's the scientific core beneath the drama. Those sparks were producing something real. Tiny amounts of ozone, nitrogen oxides, and even trace elements from vaporized materials. But again, no one had the equipment to analyze these things yet. All they had were their senses, and noses, as it turned out, were notoriously inconsistent. One London-based experimenter, following Franklin's lead, built his own lightning rod and conducted a rooftop test. After a powerful jolt knocked his hat off and his assistant halfway into a chimney, he declared that the lightning smelled like the breath of iron dragons, which probably tells you more about his literary ambitions than his olfactory accuracy. Another interesting figure, Giambattista Beccaria, an Italian physicist and contemporary of Franklin. He agreed that lightning and lab sparks were essentially the same, but he insisted their smells were not. He believed that local climate and earth energies flavored the electrical scent, much like wine. Electricita Piemontese, he wrote proudly, smells of the Alps. You suspect he was just homesick. Still, Beccaria did what few others did. He tried to measure the smell. Using sealed jars, animal bladders, don't ask, and curious sniff tests, he attempted to isolate the scent of a single spark. He failed, but not for lack of effort. You walk now through a strange space, half museum, half scent garden. Bottles line the walls, labeled things like spark, June rain, or jar number 4, sheep experiment. You try one. It smells like nothing. Another? Dust and glass. But one, just one, smells like static. That faint, almost peppery scent you get before a lightning storm. It's faint, but it's real. And suddenly, you understand what they were chasing. Not just knowledge, not just spectacle, but something ephemeral, elusive, the ghost of a force that couldn't be held, seen, or touched for long, but maybe, just maybe, could be smelled, even if it smelled different to every nose. And so Franklin, with his key and kite, may not have settled the scent debate, but he helped tether electricity to reality, gave it rules, brought it down from the clouds, literally, and whether it smelled like vinegar, metal, rain, or nothing at all, the world would never forget what followed. You're back indoors now, your shoes still damp from the Franklin storm, but the room you're in is quieter, more controlled. Glass domes sit under velvet cloths, and copper wires glint under flickering candlelight. This is not a showy parlor or daring rooftop lab. This is chemistry, and what's wafting through the air now is something sharp, clean, and very new. You're about to witness the birth of ozone. It's the early 1800s, and a curious Dutch chemist named Martinus van Marum is fiddling with one of the most powerful electrostatic machines of his day, a massive contraption with rotating glass discs taller than a grown man. When it discharges, the sparks leap like fireflies on espresso. And every time it fires, there's a peculiar smell. You know this one now. It's the one you caught before a thunderstorm. The one that stings just a little at the back of your throat. But Van Marum doesn't have a name for it yet. All he can do is describe it. A peculiar, penetrating odor, very similar to the smell noted during lightning. Others start to agree. Across Europe, scientists replicate the effect. Zap, sniff, repeat. And then, finally, in 1840, a German chemist named Christian Friedrich Skonbein gives it a name, ozone, from the Greek ozean, meaning to smell. Pretty on the nose, pun entirely intended. You're standing beside Skonbein now as he performs his experiments in Basel. His nose, apparently very good at its job, becomes his primary instrument. He's the kind of man who sniffs things before measuring them. And in that odd little quirk lies one of the first great advances in understanding electricity's signature smell. He notices that the odor appears not just during electrical discharge, but also when oxygen is exposed to ultraviolet light. He starts connecting dots. This is why lightning smells. This is what those Leyden jar shocks were releasing. It's not the electricity itself. It's what the electricity creates in the air. Here's the kicker. The discovery of ozone should have ended the argument. Should have put the great "what does electricity smell like?" debate to bed. But it didn't. Because, and here's the twist, not all electrical smells are ozone. Some sparks produce different aromas depending on what materials are involved. Burn a copper wire, and you get a metallic tang. Toast a bit of silk or hair during a static shock, and congratulations, it smells like regret. And eggs. So now you've got multiple candidates. Ozone, sulfur, singed fabric, maybe a dash of unwashed aristocrat if you're in the wrong salon. Which one is the true smell of electricity? Historians still argue whether Skonbein's discovery was understood correctly at the time. Many embraced it. Others felt it was too narrow. After all, they'd smelled so many things during experiments. Ozone couldn't possibly explain all. One fringe scientist even accused Skonbein of reducing a noble scent to a gas, as if describing it chemically somehow ruined the magic. You picture Skonbein reading that criticism and sighing over his microscope, muttering, "It's still noble. It just has a formula now." Back in the lab, a curious trend emerges. Some scientists try to bottle the smell. Yes, really. They take air from shock chambers, seal it in glass tubes or bladders, and claim the aroma lasts several days if undisturbed. Most of these bottles end up smelling like dust or vinegar within hours, but a few true believers insist they've captured pure electrical ether. One French noblewoman keeps a bottle on her writing desk and claims it helps with migraines. More likely, she just enjoys the placebo. You open one of those bottles now, imaginary of course, and take a whiff. It's faint, dry, a little sharp, maybe metallic, maybe something else, and it hits you. Part of the reason this debate won't die is because smell is so maddeningly subjective. One man's invigorating purity is another's burnt shoe. You can't blame the 18th century scientists for arguing. They were all telling the truth, as far as their noses were concerned. You're reminded of an experiment Skonbein himself noted. He invited several colleagues to sniff the same ozone-producing reaction. One said it was like sea air. Another said it reminded him of fresh snow. A third said it was unpleasant, like spoiled ink. Same gas, same room, 3 realities. At this point in the story, it's tempting to laugh at them, to think, wow, what a bunch of silly old guys sniffing sparks. But take a breath and look closer. This debate wasn't about smell. Not really. It was about the nature of invisible forces. They were trying to describe what they couldn't see, what they couldn't hold. So they reached for their noses, their skin, their intuition. You might use lasers and voltmeters today, but they were using goosebumps and hunches and the occasional singed eyebrow. That smell, the one Skonbein named, is still with us. It lingers in copy machines, arcs from overloaded plugs, rides the wind before a thunderstorm. You've probably smelled it without knowing. You might have even said, "Smells like lightning," just like they did 200 years ago. So the next time you catch that tang in the air, remember, it's not just ozone. It's history. It's Franklin's key. It's Van Marum's spinning wheels. It's Skonbein leaning into a test tube, eyes watering slightly, whispering to himself, "Yes, that's the one." You're in Paris now. It's evening. Candles flicker, silk rustles, and someone in a powdered wig is waving their hands dramatically over another person's face. This is not a seance. It's science. Kind of. Welcome to the world of animal magnetism. A theory as wildly popular as it was totally unprovable, and one that brings us one of the weirdest chapters in the debate over the smell of electricity. Your host tonight is Franz Anton Mesmer, a fashionable, theatrically inclined physician who believed that an invisible, fluid-like force flowed through all living things. He called it animal magnetism, a universal energy that, when blocked or unbalanced, caused illness. His cure? Directing the flow using magnets, glass rods, intense eye contact, and, of course, electricity. You watch as Mesmer performs his treatment. Patients gather around a tub filled with iron filings and water. They grasp metal rods. The room grows tense. Someone swoons. Mesmer circles the room slowly, touching shoulders, holding palms an inch away from foreheads. Sparks crackle now, and then, perhaps from a hidden Leyden jar, perhaps from the tension. And then someone says, "I smell violets and copper." Another gasps. Like clean wind before a storm. One woman, fainting slightly, murmurs, "It's divine." Mesmer took these reactions very seriously. He believed the smells were evidence, proof that the magnetic or electrical fluids were in motion. To him, these weren't subjective sensory quirks. They were physical traces of healing energy being released. Some of his patients swore by it. Others were unconvinced, especially when the treatments involved dramatic fainting, crying, and the occasional bout of uncontrollable laughter. Was the room charged with vital force? Or just a bit too much wine? Historians still argue whether Mesmer believed his own theories or simply rode the wave of fashionable pseudoscience all the way to fame. His methods were never exactly repeatable, but he wasn't alone. In fact, many 18th century physicians explored some version of his ideas, linking electricity with health, healing, and yes, smell. You wander into another clinic now, one that's slightly less dramatic but still curious. A German doctor applies static electricity to a patient suffering from melancholy of the spleen, which we now know is not a thing. After a few sparks, the doctor sniffs the air and declares the treatment a success, because he smells the pure air of electrical cleansing. His assistant wrinkles his nose and mutters, "Smells like roasted shoe leather." Science, once again, proves subjective. But don't roll your eyes just yet. Even though these early electromedical theories seem far-fetched now, they weren't entirely ridiculous for the time. Electricity was a new frontier, barely understood, and full of potential. If it could move muscles, as seen in frog-leg twitching experiments, who's to say it couldn't move moods or disease? And those smells, whatever they were, became signs. Clues. You get shocked, you smell something strange, and suddenly that smell becomes part of the experience, part of the cure. One fringe group in Vienna even suggested that a lack of electrical scent in a patient's response was a warning sign, an absence of vitality. If the zap doesn't smell, you might be doomed. No pressure. Meanwhile, more grounded scientists were still trying to track down the source of these mysterious smells. A few hypothesized that it wasn't the electricity itself, but the material being zapped. Wool gloves, silk gowns, human hair. Each left its own scent behind. And, depending on your setup, the whole room might smell different. You're in one such lab now. A series of tests are underway. Zap copper, zap tin, zap dry bark, zap cheese, don't ask why. A small group of scientists sit nearby, sniffing the air after each shock and writing down notes like earthy, sour, not unpleasant, and distinctly unholy. One particularly poetic observer writes, "The air after discharge smells of celestial friction." Another more practical one replies, "It smells like Grandpa's fireplace." The notes are inconclusive, but deeply entertaining. The idea that electrical discharge releases invisible particles into the air gains traction. These particles, effluvia, they're called, are thought to carry smell, heat, maybe even health properties. And the way a room changes scent after a strong spark, to them, that's evidence. Real, physical evidence. Some even claim the smell sticks to objects. One Londoner writes that his spectacles, after being shocked by a small coil, retained a faint metallic scent for days. Another insists that his gloves now smell forever of storm. You suspect they were all just smelling whatever they wanted to. Still, something about the ritual of sniffing electricity becomes deeply embedded in this era of science. You can almost imagine the experimenter's checklist. Generate spark, heavy check mark. Observe arc, heavy check mark. Smell, air, heavy checkmark. Argue about what it smells like, heavy checkmark. In time, Mesmer's theories fall out of favor. His treatments get banned. The scientific establishment declares animal magnetism more stagecraft than science. But his influence lingers, especially the idea that electrical phenomena affect more than just objects, that they change you, your feelings, your energy, and your perception of scent. And even as scientists scoff at Mesmer, many still keep sniffing. Secretly, curiously, hoping to catch something in the air they can't quite explain. So you close your eyes. You're back in that room with the glass rods and the quiet hum. A faint scent drifts past your nose. Ozone, copper, lavender, burnt leather, maybe all of it. Maybe none. But one thing's for sure, electricity isn't just lighting up the lab anymore. It's lighting up your imagination. You're seated on a rickety wooden stool in a cramped, smoke-filled lab. The walls are lined with scorched parchments and dusty jars. Something somewhere is gently smoldering. A soft pop crackle from a brass rod on the bench, and the smell hits you immediately. Rotten eggs. Welcome to the sulfur theory, one of the more enduring and frankly least pleasant attempts to explain the mysterious scent of electricity. Throughout the 18th century, many scientists, especially those who worked with friction machines or spark jars, reported that after a good solid discharge, the air reeked like sulfur. Not a hint, not a trace. Reeked. Like brimstone, like fireworks, like your weird uncle's backyard chemistry set. Now, sulfur had long been associated with powerful forces, volcanoes, alchemy, hell. So when people started smelling it around sparks and shocks, their imaginations ignited. One early natural philosopher wrote that the electrical scent was of such force as to suggest the opening of the earth. A bit dramatic, but the imagery stuck. You watch as a young assistant performs an experiment. He discharges a Leyden jar between two brass poles and immediately wrinkles his nose. Ugh, he says, eggs. His supervisor jots down, olfactory, sulfuric signature confirmed. Science. But here's where it gets odd. Not everyone smelled it. Some scientists consistently reported the sulfurous smell, especially in humid weather or when shocking certain materials. Others claimed they never noticed it, and a few swore it depended on who was present. A side theory posited that the temperament of the observer might influence the smell, which feels like blaming your nose on your mood. Historians still argue whether the sulfur reports were due to genuine byproducts of electrical reactions, like trace sulfur dioxide, or if they were simply the result of nearby materials reacting to heat and spark. In other words, were they actually smelling the electricity? Or just scorched wool, hair, or some unlucky insect that wandered too close? You walk into a larger public demonstration. A philosopher with far too many buttons on his coat fires up a massive static machine. The audience gasps as sparks leap from one dome to another. A woman faints. A dog barks. And then someone loudly announces, "It smells like the devil's laundromat." The sulfur theory really starts to gain traction here. Not because it's proven, but because it feels satisfyingly spooky. Even theologians get involved. Some sermons begin referencing the scent of divine power, and in darker corners, hellfire. A few fringe thinkers begin warning that electrical experiments summon forces from beneath. One even writes, "As lightning cracks the heavens, so its breath echoes from below." Someone give that guy a book deal. Of course, there are others, more rational, less dramatic, who push back. These scientists start cataloging experiments with more precision. They run tests on various materials. Zap clean air. Compare with sparks near cloth or skin. And increasingly, they notice something odd. The sulfur smell isn't always there. One Royal Society member publishes a calm, careful rebuttal. "I have shocked no fewer than 30 items under identical conditions. The scent, when present, appears to result not from the electric action itself, but from ignition of surrounding matter, particularly hairs." Another writes, more bluntly, "The stink is not the spark, it is what you cooked with it." Still, the smell of sulfur won't go away. It's persistent, not necessarily because it's accurate, but because it's visceral. It tells a story. You light a candle, you smell wax. You make a spark, you smell sulfur. Your brain likes that connection. It fits. In some circles, the sulfur smell becomes shorthand for intensity. If your experiment smells like rotten eggs, it means it worked. If it doesn't, maybe your device is underpowered. Or maybe your nose is underperforming. Either way, the smell becomes a kind of performance metric. You see this in a curious trend from the late 1700s. Inventors bragging about the stink their machines create. My new galvanic stack produces a scent likened to the deepest chasm of Vesuvius. My portable shock box emits a fine aroma of boiling brimstone after 5 discharges. You imagine modern inventors doing this with phones. Smells like triumph and burning toast. And of course, not to be outdone, several perfume makers try to get in on the action. That's right. One French alchemist begins experimenting with electrified oils and advertises a perfume supposedly charged with electric essence. His early concoctions mostly smell like garlic and disappointment, but he insists it adds vital energy to the wearer. A few socialites try it, none twice. One contemporary reviewer writes, "It awakens the senses, particularly the sense that you've made a mistake." Still, the sulfur association proves hard to shake. Even today, when something short-circuits and burns, the scent often includes sulfurous elements from rubber, insulation, or burning material. So the 18th century noses may not have been entirely wrong. They were just sniffing more than electricity. By now, you've smelled a dozen things in this story. Ozone, copper, sulfur, and something like old books caught in a thunderstorm. And maybe you're wondering, what is the real smell of electricity? Maybe there isn't one. Or maybe, just maybe, there are many. Like electricity itself. Unseen, unpredictable, and always slightly out of reach. Its scent refuses to be pinned down. So you leave this sulfuric lab, a handkerchief over your nose, thinking not about science, but about subjectivity. About how, in chasing facts, we often bump into feelings. Even in a spark, you're stepping into a quiet, clinical chamber now. The drama of Mesmer's fainting salons and sulfur-stinking laboratories is behind you. What greets you here is clean, white walls, sterile instruments, and a sense of precision. This is the world of Galvani, Volta, and the strange new electricity being pulled from metals and frogs. Yes, frogs. You're in Bologna, Italy, in the late 1780s. Luigi Galvani, a physician and anatomy professor, is performing a dissection of a frog's leg. His assistant accidentally touches a scalpel to a brass hook attached to the leg, and it twitches. Not just a little, violently. Galvani's eyes go wide. His pulse quickens. There's a storm in his mind, but he's calm on the surface. It's alive, he mutters, like a Renaissance-era Frankenstein. Now, this isn't the dramatic jolt of a Leyden jar or the zapping theatrics of Franklin's kite. This is quieter, stranger. The frog's leg is reacting to metal, not a visible spark. To Galvani, this means one thing. The animal must have electricity inside it. He calls it animal electricity, a mysterious internal force that he believes flows through living beings like blood or breath. You watch as he repeats the experiment with different frogs, different hooks, different metals. Each time, the twitch, the kick, the dance of dead limbs. And each time a scent. It's fainter here, subtler than sulfur, more delicate than ozone. A medical student describes it as the faint smell of rainwater left in a tin cup. Another says it's like wet skin in a warm cellar. Galvani himself barely mentions it, but assistants often note a lingering trace of something earthy and metallic. Again, it's not the electricity itself, but the environment, the tools, the flesh, the spark of reaction. And once again, the nose gets dragged into the science. Historians still argue whether Galvani's theory was biological or mystical. Was he uncovering the electrochemical basis of muscle movement, or inventing a whole new kind of life energy? The line between physiology and philosophy was still blurry. Enter Alessandro Volta. Volta, An Italian physicist and Galvani's friendly rival-turned-debate nemesis isn't convinced. He believes it's not animal electricity making the frog jump, it's metal-on-metal chemistry creating a tiny current. The frog is just a twitchy voltmeter. To prove it, Volta builds what becomes the first true battery. Stacked discs of copper and zinc separated by brine-soaked cloth. And when wires from this stack are touched to a muscle, or just each other, current flows. And guess what? It smells. You're beside Volta now as he builds his voltaic pile. A modest little device, maybe the size of a sandwich. He touches the ends. His eyes widen. There's heat, a tingle, a sharp pop in the air, and a scent. Some call it metallic. Others say acidic. One bold French visitor declares, "It is as if a keyhole has opened to the engine of life," which probably sounded better in French. And once again, no one agrees on what it actually smells like. Volta himself noted a slight pungency, especially when touching his tongue to the wire ends. Yes, scientists back then had a shocking number of oral experiments. Others reported something like vinegar or mold or even dry pepper. This smell becomes part of the phenomenon. The voltaic pile is not theatrical like the Leyden jar. It doesn't flash or bang, but it hums, gently, quietly, and its scent, however faint, becomes part of its identity. You drift into a salon in Paris. A small voltaic stack sits on a table as guests line up to experience the electric kiss. A man and woman each hold a terminal. When they lean in, zap. Their lips meet with a spark, a laugh, and a trace of what one poet calls burnt honey. Another woman, dramatically, fans herself and declares, "It smells like forbidden knowledge." Everyone claps. By now, the debate has splintered. Some still cling to the sulfur theory. Others swear by ozone. The Galvani crowd says it's organic, the breath of the body reacting. Volta's camp insists it's metallic ions, and therefore the scent is part of the chemical process, not the electrical one. And once again, historians still argue who is closest to the truth. Probably all of them, and none. Because here's the thing about electricity in this era. It's a transformation machine. It turns one thing into another. Static into motion, metal into force, life into twitching limbs. And in that alchemy, scents arise, not from the electricity, but from what it touches. You hold your hand near the voltaic pile now. It hums softly. There's a tingle on your skin, and maybe, just maybe, you catch a hint of vinegar and iron. It's subtle, gone as quickly as it came, but it leaves something behind in your memory. Not just a scent, a story. And so, the frog twitches. The air stirs, and the invisible world smells, faintly, like something trying to be understood. You're standing now on the threshold of the 19th century, a period when electricity begins to move from parlors and private labs into serious institutions. You can almost hear the clink of beakers and the hiss of gas lamps as universities across Europe establish formal halls of physics, outfitted with coils, magnets, glass rods, and increasingly, coiled wire and chemical stink. Because here's the new player on the stage, electromagnetism. Less spark, more hum. Less flare, more function. And with it comes a whole new suite of smells. Right now, you're in a damp Cambridge laboratory peering over the shoulder of Michael Faraday. He's soft-spoken, patient, and modest, precisely the kind of man you trust with invisible forces. On the bench before him sits a copper coil wrapped tightly around a rod of iron. A battery hums gently off to the side. Faraday connects the wires. The circuit closes. The iron jumps. A compass needle wiggles. Something invisible moves through space, subtle but undeniable. And floating in the air now, the smell. It's not ozone. It's not sulfur. It's something warmer, like hot metal rubbed with lemon peel. Not unpleasant, just technical. One of Faraday's assistants later describes it as the scent of curiosity cooked in copper. And what you're witnessing isn't just an experiment. It's the beginning of electrical engineering. Machines will now do things. And whenever they do, whenever wires heat, batteries fizz, magnets snap, the lab fills with scent. The wires warm. The insulation softens. Copper begins to oxidize slightly under prolonged use. Faraday writes about the heating effect of electric currents and how even the thinnest wires can glow, melt, and occasionally burst into flames. With every failure or miscalculation, smoke, burnt silk, scorched varnish, and yes, sometimes the infamous rotten egg tang. You imagine the room, part scientific cathedral, part accidental kitchen. And it wasn't just Faraday. Labs across Europe were replicating his work, often with less caution. In university in Berlin, a student attempts to replicate magnetic induction. The coil is wrong. The voltage is too high. He jolts himself backward into a bookshelf. And someone nearby sniffs the air and says, "I believe we've discovered the smell of failure." That becomes a running joke in labs. Smells like failure. Or worse, smells like promotion delay. The sensory feedback from these new machines quickly becomes an early warning system. Long before circuit breakers or thermal cutoffs, scientists rely on their noses. If the wire smells hot, shut it down. If the air smells sharp or acidic, step back. If you smell absolutely nothing, well, that's probably fine. Or the coil is about to explode. Historians still argue whether this kind of scent awareness counts as scientific observation or just survival instinct. But in these early years, the two were often indistinguishable. Safety goggles weren't a thing. Lab coats were more aesthetic than protective. The smell was your first and only line of defense. You follow Faraday down a corridor now, past workshops and chalkboards, and into a smaller side room. On the table sits something new. A spinning copper disc, the first version of what will become a generator. He calls it the homopolar motor. No spark, no bang, just a quiet, steady motion and the unmistakable aroma of warmed varnish and metal. You close your eyes. It's the scent of the future. Because these experiments aren't just theory, they're becoming technology. And every prototype comes with its own signature smell. One early telegraph station reports a permanent tang of tin and ink. A workshop in Boston describes a cloying scent of rubber and iron filings. A young technician in London claims that he can tell if a circuit is underpowered just by sniffing the casing. And this is where things start to shift. The smell of electricity, once mysterious and poetic, is becoming mundane. It's not a divine spark anymore. It's just the aroma of work. Still, the poetry hasn't vanished entirely. Faraday, ever the philosopher, writes in his journal, "Electricity is a silent river, flowing through copper veins. When it stirs the metal speaks in scent." You can almost imagine that scent now. A mild warmth, a trace of oxidized wire, the faint whisper of burned cotton. It's not beautiful exactly, but it is honest and human. One curious footnote. Some scientists begin classifying these electrical aromas in notebooks. A kind of scent taxonomy. You flip through one such log. Type A, ozone-rich from fast spark. Type B, sulfuric from failed coil. Type C, burnt library, leather, smoke, book glue. Type D, nothing, which is even worse. It becomes a language of sorts, a way for one generation to whisper to the next. Pay attention. Your nose knows. So as you linger in this lab, Faraday hunched over his notes, wires still warm beneath your fingers, you realize that the age of magic is ending. The age of machines is beginning. And through it all, the scent of electricity lingers. Not as a riddle anymore, but as a reminder. The room darkens now, but only just. You're not in a lab anymore. Not really. You're in a room filled with metal coils, massive batteries, and an unusually high number of fur-coated rugs. Welcome to the world of public demonstrations, where electricity isn't just science, it's theater. It's the mid-1800s, and electricity is hot, figuratively and occasionally literally. You're attending one of the increasingly popular electrostatic soirees, public performances where sparks are summoned, shocks are delivered, and a certain breed of Victorian thrill-seeker gasps, swoons, and occasionally smells burnt lace. Your host tonight is a charming, slightly eccentric man in formal wear who insists on being called Professor Tesla. Not the real Nikola Tesla, he's not on stage just yet, but rather one of dozens of gentle, Eamon lecturers using props, parlor tricks, and clever smoke to dazzle a paying audience. And guess what? The scent of electricity is now part of the show. He begins with a Leyden jar demo. You hear a sharp crack, see a brilliant blue spark, and then smell it. Ozone, unmistakable, slicing through the room like an exclamation point. The audience murmurs. They've read about that smell in newspapers and novels. The smell of the storm, one woman whispers. Then comes a magneto. A hand crank turns, wires spin, and a volunteer from the crowd receives a mild shock to the fingertips. The scent this time is burnt glove. You can almost hear the social anxiety rising. The scent of electricity has gone from mystery to novelty. Demonstrators play with it deliberately, even exaggerated. A hidden sulfur pellet ignites during a spark demo to reinforce the brimstone vibe. A spritz of vinegar preps the air for a galvanic display. The room smells like a cross between a storm cloud and a bakery gone wrong, and the crowd loves it. Historians still argue whether these stage effects helped or hindered public understanding of electricity. On one hand, they made it accessible, fun even. On the other hand, they occasionally made it seem supernatural again, just as Faraday was trying to establish its rational, repeatable laws. One Parisian showman, Professor Voltaire, claimed his device released the scent of pure intelligence. It mostly smelled like scorched oilcloth and questionable cologne. Still, people kept coming and smelling. You follow a group backstage after the show. One assistant is wiping down the coils. Another fans away smoke. A third opens a window to let out the lingering tang of, what is that? Charred velvet? Lemon? You don't even know anymore. That's part of the story now. The scent of electricity has become a character, a cue in the play. Smell the spark, feel the thrill. It's Pavlovian. At the same time, serious scientists are still hard at work, just less theatrical. Over in a proper lab, early telegraph engineers are dealing with the smell in a very different way, as a problem. They report that when wires overheat, or when the primitive batteries leak acid, there's a scent like boiled cabbage left in a cannon. You wince. They did too. One telegraph office closes for a full day to air out the unbearable tang of oxidized copper and clerk sweat. There's even an internal document circulated at the British General Post Office that warns persistent sharp aroma near junction boxes may indicate insulation failure. Or the new in turn. So now you've got two realities. The scent of electricity as entertainment, designed to awe and mystify. And the scent as hazard signal, an olfactory red flag that something's about to catch fire. And sometimes these two worlds collide. At one infamous demonstration in Vienna, a performer overloaded a coil, and the scent that filled the room was not ozone or sulfur, but burning feathers and melting varnish. The show was cut short. One child reportedly cried, "The storm is broken," and had to be carried out. Meanwhile, newspaper reviews began to include scent as part of their commentary. A marvelous spark, a dreadful stench. 3 stars. This blending of sensation, spectacle, and smell begins to solidify a new idea. Electricity isn't just a phenomenon. It's an experience, a full-body, multi-sensory one. And scent, unpredictable, elusive, emotional, remains the wildest card in the deck. You pause now, standing in the quiet aftermath of a spark show. The seats are empty, the coils are cooling, and the scent that remains is familiar. A mix of ozone, dust, and curiosity. That's what's interesting. The smell of electricity is always a little after the fact. It doesn't lead the moment. It lingers. Like memory. Like doubt. Like a reminder that something real just happened. Even if you can't fully explain it. So as the professor hangs up his spark wand and someone opens the side door to let in the night air, you breathe deep. The scent has faded, but the sense of wonder? Still sharp. Now you're in a house. Not a palace. Not a lab. Just a normal, middle-class sitting room in 1870s London. The curtains are heavy. The wallpaper is floral. There's a piano in the corner and a strong smell of gaslight and damp wool. Until something new arrives. Electricity. Not the kind that makes frogs twitch or shocks party guests. This is something different. This is domestic current, and with it comes a whole new scent, the smell of modern life warming up. You follow a young electrician as he runs wire through the floorboards. He's installing one of the earliest residential lighting systems, a low-voltage setup with exposed filaments that flicker like tiny sunrises. He's careful. There are no plastic coatings yet. The wires are insulated with gutta percha, a tree-derived latex that smells like wet rubber boots and ginger root when warm. He tightens a screw, flips a lever, and click. The lights buzz faintly, and a strange scent lifts into the room. Metallic, woody dry. The lady of the house peers over her teacup and says, "Smells like a thunderstorm and sawdust." Her husband disagrees. "More like a warm biscuit tin." They're both right. Kind of. The early electrification of homes created a confusion of smells. Cloth-wrapped wires warmed up and released the scent of scorched linen. Arc lamps, though rarely used indoors, emitted the bite of ozone and hot glass. Bulbs with carbon filaments often produced a smell described as hot sugar and carbon toast. Children were often the first to notice. One diary entry from 1873 describes a boy running into the kitchen shouting, "The air smells like a robot," well before anyone knew what that meant. Historians still argue whether early domestic users accepted electricity because it felt clean and efficient, or simply because it smelled better than gas. Coal gas lighting, the reigning method at the time, came with the stench of burnt sulfur, metal, and occasional gas leaks, sometimes fatal. Electric lighting had its own aroma, but it was drier, lighter, and less persistent. To some, it smelled like the future. In fact, several early electric companies capitalized on this. Their advertisements featured slogans like, "No more fumes," "The clean light of the wire," "The home without a smell," "Breathe the brightness of tomorrow." They weren't just selling light. They were selling air. But not everyone loved it. A few cautious souls began expressing concern. "What does that smell?" they asked. "Is it healthy? Is it natural?" A series of op-eds debated whether electric lighting warped the nasal humors or disrupted sleep cycles by changing the scent of nighttime itself. One particularly poetic letter claimed, "Our dreams, once perfumed by whale oil and ash, are now invaded by this new essence, coppery, dry, and soulless." Others disagreed entirely, describing electric scent as invigorating. A school teacher in Leeds wrote in her journal, "My classroom now hums and smells of ideas." You suspect the students had a different opinion. You're in a different house now, across the Atlantic. Brooklyn, 1881. Here, a prototype Edison electrical system powers a few lamps in a brownstone parlor. The current is low, but the effect is stunning. The room glows golden. There's a crackling hum near the fuse board, and beside it, a warm smell, shellac, copper, and gentle heat. You lean close. It's comforting, mechanical, alive. The father of the house, a printer by trade, sniffs the air and nods. Smells like progress. By the 1890s, the smell of electricity is everywhere, at least in cities. It hums from streetcar lines, crackles near transformers, and lingers around power stations. Children begin associating the scent with movement. Adults associate it with safety, or sometimes anxiety. Because yes, by now, people know too much heat, the wrong smell, and something could go very wrong. One housewife keeps a list on her refrigerator. Warm metal? Fine. Dusty spark? Wipe it. Eggy stench? Call for help. Smell becomes diagnostic. One strange case even reports that a dog in Connecticut refused to enter a room with a faulty junction box, whining at the doorway until a loose wire was discovered, glowing faintly red. The smell? Burnt shoestrings and raspberries. No one ever figured that one out. Still, as electricity becomes more invisible, more everyday, its smell begins to fade from consciousness. New insulation materials reduce burn risk. Wires are hidden in walls. Lighting becomes cool, safe, predictable. By 1900, a middle-class child might grow up surrounded by electricity and never know how it smells. Unless something breaks, then it all comes rushing back. The whiff of ozone, or copper, or varnish. And with it, the sense that something unseen has stirred. So you sit on the edge of a soft chair, in a room half lit by carbon filament. The air is warm, the walls are quiet, and the faintest scent of charged copper lingers near your fingers. It doesn't smell like mystery anymore. It smells like home. You're outside now, stepping cautiously through the muddy outskirts of a growing city. The year is 1888, and the skyline is just beginning to sprout a strange new creature, the electric power station. It's squat, industrial, humming like a mechanical throat clearing. And as you draw near, the air changes. Gone are the sulfur and salon perfumes. Here, electricity smells like coal smoke, hot brick, and grease copper. It's not romantic. It's not mysterious. It's infrastructure. You stand before the Pearl Street Station in New York City, the first centralized electric power plant in the world. It's Thomas Edison's baby, and it powers about 400 lamps across Lower Manhattan. Steam hisses from vents. The walls are sweating from heat. And the air? Heavy with burnt oil, damp wool coats, and scorched wiring insulation. A reporter once described the smell as a cross between a steamship engine room and a basement bakery. Not exactly a scent you bottle and sell. Inside, workers scramble around dynamos, massive rotating machines that roar like lions and spit out voltage. They're primitive by modern standards, but revolutionary then. And each one exudes heat, a kind of baked metal aroma, with just enough chemical tang to make you question whether something's wrong. Electricity, once scented with curiosity, is now tinged with responsibility. Maintenance logs from this period include notes like, smell of varnish equals armature overheating, acidic odor in room C, possible battery boilover, burnt peanut smell, again. Yes, burnt peanuts. Several operators report it as an early sign of motor failure. Eventually, it becomes unofficial code among engineers. Smell that, and you better run. Historians still argue whether Edison's centralized system would have succeeded without such vigilant, nose-based troubleshooting. In truth, there were no alarms or readouts back then. The machines talked through heat, vibration, and yes, scent. You linger near one of the massive belt-driven generators. It's shuddering slightly. The air is thick. You can actually feel the molecules moving, charged, hot, almost sticky. There's a sharpness in your nostrils like biting into a grapefruit and getting slapped with a wrench. One technician wipes sweat from his brow and mutters, "Smells like payday." Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Nikola Tesla is reimagining the smell of electricity altogether. Not because he's obsessed with it, but because his inventions don't always smell at all. Why? Because Tesla's world is alternating current, quieter, cooler, and capable of traveling farther with less energy loss. His motors are elegant, enclosed, efficient. When they do smell, it's usually subtle. Ozone, graphite, a hint of ionized dust. You imagine him striding through a Westinghouse lab, coat flowing, nostrils flaring slightly. He doesn't love mess. He doesn't love heat. He wants electricity that floats silently through the world, unbothered, unscented. But even he isn't immune. In one letter, he writes, "A faint perfume surrounds the machine at high oscillation, not unlike burnt lilac," which, frankly, sounds a bit romantic for a motor coil. But hey, it's Tesla. You now find yourself in a new type of room, an industrial control center. There are gauges, levers, blinking bulbs. Everything looks controlled, ordered, but that scent, it lingers. Engineers learn to track it. They say things like, "It smells like a short in coil 6. Is that varnish or something worse? If it smells like raisins, shut it down." And then there's ozone, ever present. A clean, sharp aroma like the moment before a thunderstorm. Often the first and last thing noticed before a sudden surge or arc. Some grew to love it. Others feared it. One technician's journal from 1899 reads, "The smell struck me before the noise. I knew it would go before it did. I could smell the failure coming like rain." That's the thing about the smell of electricity. It's anticipatory. It always seems to show up a few seconds before something happens. Before the flash, before the shock, before the motor screams. And it teaches a strange kind of awareness. Not what's happening, but what might. By the end of the century, as power stations multiply and electrified infrastructure stretches across the globe, these smells begin to blend into the background. They're no longer rare. They're part of life. The average person might pass 3 or 4 electric substations in a day and not think twice. But to those who work behind the scenes, who listen to the machines, and yes, sniff them, the old instincts persist. Smell still means something. A lab with no smell? Maybe the machine's off. A smell that's too clean? Maybe it's dying slowly. A whiff of toast when there's no bread? Run. So here you are, back outside the power station. The sky is dimming. Cables hum in the distance. The street lamps flicker on, one by one. And you realize something subtle, but strange. Electricity has changed everything. But it has also, quietly, chemically, changed the air. And in that air is a memory. Of ozone. Of effort. Of man wrestling with storm. You're walking through a laboratory again, but it's different this time. Brighter. Calmer. Safer. It's the early 20th century now, and electricity is no longer new. It's normal. The sparks are hidden inside machines, the wires tucked neatly behind walls. The smell is no longer dramatic, but it's there, faint, patient, waiting. You're in a room at General Electric's research facility, circa the 1915. There's a hum in the walls, soft and steady, like a city breathing. A row of young engineers in white coats sit at benches lined with motors, switches, and coils. No smoke, no sparks. But if you lean in close, there it is, varnish, heated copper, a hint of baked shellac. One engineer lifts a motor casing and takes a long, thoughtful sniff. Smells like we're getting close, he mutters. You'd think by now we'd have moved past this, sniffing machines like mechanics in a perfume shop. But no. Because even in the age of scientific instruments and voltmeters, the nose knows. Historians still argue whether this reliance on scent was practical or just habit. But in truth, it was both. Machines don't always fail dramatically. They fail slowly. And the first sign? A faint, unfamiliar smell. Take transformers. These hulking metal giants began appearing everywhere. On poles, in basements, beside train tracks. When they failed, it wasn't always with a bang. Sometimes it started with a warm, sweet scent, like melting crayons. That's the insulating oil breaking down. A few more hours? Flames. Blackout. Lawsuit. So engineers began cataloging odors. Manuals included notes like, acrid peppery scent equals carbon tracking in switchgear. Sweet almond equals possible arcing in oil bath. Burnt popcorn equals insulation fire imminent. Yes, popcorn. You'll never smell it the same way again. You step into a smaller room now, a classroom, really. A young woman is giving a demonstration on electrical safety. She holds up wire samples and asks the group to identify failures. One student sniffs a bit of scorched cable and says, "That's fried mica." Another raises her hand. Smells like someone tried to iron a pancake. Everyone laughs, but she's right. They all know the scent. They've learned it like a language. Because that's what this era is about. Electricity isn't chaos anymore. It's discipline, training, systems. And with it comes a new vocabulary. Part spoken, part sniffed. The industrial workplace becomes a kind of scentscape. The humming of motors is matched by the sharpness of ozone near heavy relays, the waxy tang near cable insulation, and the bitter burn of dust on resistors. A full sensory map. You don't just see the grid. You smell it working. It wasn't all serious, of course. There were still a few pranksters. One famous lab technician in Detroit once dabbed his sleeves with just enough burnt capacitor smell to cause panic in an elevator. Another sprinkled powdered sulfur near a colleague's desk and blamed the new prototype. Electric jokes. They had a shock value. You step now into a darker corner of the era, the early electrocution studies. Scientists were still trying to understand how exactly electricity kills. And some of the experiments, gruesome as they were, produced distinctive odors. One researcher noted, the moment of fatal contact was always preceded by a spike in the olfactory environment. Hair, skin, and something else. Something like boiling copper coins. Grim but important. These accounts helped refine circuit breakers, grounding standards, and safety codes. So even the scent of tragedy had purpose. Meanwhile, at the other end of the spectrum, a strange new industry was quietly emerging: electronics. You're in a tiny lab in 1928. There's a glass radio tube glowing faintly orange on the bench. Wires snake from it to a tuning dial. The operator leans in, adjusts a knob, and the sound of a big band orchestra hisses softly from speaker. And the scent? Warm dust, old books, a faint mineral tang. It's the smell of the early digital dream being born. Radios, vacuum tubes, early computers. They all had their own quiet scent, less dramatic than sparks or arcs, but deeply specific. One technician would later describe the smell of a warming vacuum tube as Grandpa's attic, but with ambition. You can imagine it now. The air filled with quiet possibility. The scent of glass warmed gently by electron flow. It doesn't announce itself. It just happens, like music from behind a wall. And that's the real shift of this era. Electricity, once unpredictable and loud and stinky, has become intimate. You don't marvel at it anymore. You live with it. You breathe its byproducts. You recognize when something smells right and when something doesn't. So you walk back through the lab now, stepping over cable runners, brushing past warm oscilloscopes and cooling motors. The air hums, and in that hum is a scent that doesn't demand attention, but waits for it. A story in the background, a flicker in the air, and you, now, trained enough to notice. You're aboard a ship now, not a grand steamliner, but something more compact and utilitarian, a World War I air-enabled destroyer, slicing through the gray North Sea. The wind bites, the deck sways, and below deck, something very familiar wafts through the air: electricity. It's not the clean, crisp scent of a suburban light bulb. This is military-grade electricity, thick, heavy, laced with oil and tension. You descend into the communications room, a cramped space filled with coils, radios, and vacuum tubes that glow like tired suns. The air hits you like a warning. Ionized metal, solder flux, charred cotton, and underneath it, sweat, the kind that doesn't wash out of uniforms. In this world, electricity isn't just a power source. It's strategy, it's survival, and the scent it brings along becomes a kind of atmospheric code. You can't afford to ignore it. A junior operator glances up from a radio set and says, "Don't like that smell. Smells like drift in the tuning coil." He's not joking. In the field, a slight misalignment in frequency can mean a garbled order or worse, silence. In war, silence is never neutral. Historians still argue whether military communications during the Great War accelerated technological trust or bred a kind of fatalistic dependency. The soldiers didn't need to understand how the machines worked. They just needed to know that when something smelled like burnt cloves, it meant the vacuum tube was dying. And those tubes, they had a personality. They emitted a warm, dry scent, like heated pottery in a dusty barn. When they blew out, the smell turned sharp and cruel, somewhere between scorched almonds and singed leather straps. You crawl deeper into the hull, where power for the ship's engines is routed through an early switchboard the size of a sofa. An officer checks dials, listens to the buzz. He leans in close to the breakers, sniffs, and sighs. "Too warm. We've got creep in the line," he mutters. He doesn't need a thermometer. His nose tells him what the voltage meters don't. Meanwhile, back on land, factories across the industrial world are electrifying at breakneck speed. Conveyor belts, overhead cranes, presses, all powered by humming motors that give off a hot, greasy aroma. You're now in a factory in Pittsburgh, surrounded by sparks and shouting and the relentless smell of machine sweat. A mix of lubricant oil, belt rubber, and slowly charring insulation. The supervisor says, when it starts smelling like fried paper, "Shut off. Someone's about to lose a hand." There's a hard truth in those words. The smell of electricity in this setting is less magical, more mechanical warning system. No gauges for overload. No sensors. Just a whiff of varnish out of place, and the old-timers go tense. This is where smelling the job becomes a real trade. Apprentices are taught not just to check voltages, but to trust their noses. A wrong smell means downtime, or worse. And let's not forget the trains. You step onto a platform as an electric locomotive pulls in. The scent hits you first. Ozone, steel, brake dust, and a hint of maple syrup. That last one, it's not food. It's hot transformer oil that's just starting to break down. Conductors know it immediately. They call it the sweet smell of delay. Inside the engine cab, the air is dense. You hear the faint whine of current arcing through relays. The insulation on the motor windings, usually made from baked enamel or shellac, heats under strain, and the scent builds slowly, like something boiling in a closed room. A seasoned engineer tells you, there are only two smells I trust: nothing and warm varnish. Anything else? We're walking home. And yet, even in this utilitarian world, electricity still has moments of grace. Late at night, the smell of a quiet station, just the faint static of a radio set humming through the dark, is oddly comforting, like an invisible campfire that only machines can smell. Meanwhile, electricity is creeping into homes at scale now, not just for lighting, but for appliances. You step into a 1920s kitchen gleaming with chrome and glass. The toaster emits a cozy, slightly burnt bread aroma. Expected. But when the heating element starts to fail, it smells like overcooked dust and dying light bulbs. Even the early electric vacuum cleaners had a smell. Motor brushes grinding gently against the commutator. A burnt hair scent mingled with carpet fluff. A family would know, without anyone saying a word, that the motor was tired just from that tang in the air. So here you are, somewhere between industry and home, power and panic. The smell of electricity is no longer rare or mysterious. It's familiar, like coffee or rain, but it hasn't lost its edge. It still warns, still signals, still talks, in whispers of scent, if not sound. You look up from the factory floor. A line of lights flickers for just a moment. A transformer hums louder than usual. And there it is again. That scent. Ozone and nerves. And you know, something's coming. You're standing in the middle of an exhibition hall, and the world has gone electric. It's 1939, the New York World's Fair, and everything around you buzzes with the promise of the future. Robots wave stiffly from podiums. Electric fans cool the crowd. Neon signs blaze like daytime dreams. It's loud, it's crowded, and, perhaps most strikingly, it smells like progress. Electricity is no longer confined to labs or power stations. It's theatrical again, but not mysterious this time. It's glamorous. And the scent it carries has evolved into something almost curated. You drift through the General Motors Pavilion, where a demonstration of electric cooking fills the air with toasted bread, melted plastic, and hot chrome. The electric stove crackles politely in its corner. The scent of scorched enamel, still new, still sharp, clings faintly to the edges of the experience. It's a signature smell of this shiny new century. A child next to you sneezes and says, "Smells like a robot factory." And he's not wrong. Even the air in this place hums with ionic charge. Near the Westinghouse exhibit, you pass a row of dynamos and transformers powering the displays. The air smells clean but metallic, like a freshly scrubbed wrench left to dry in the sun. A technician walks by with a small coil wrapped in copper, grins, and says, this is the smell of civilization. That's the kind of moment you file away forever. But behind the spectacle, wartime tension simmers. The scent of electricity in the coming decade will no longer be all about wonder. It'll be about efficiency, control, and power in the grimmest sense. Fast forward just a few years, and you're standing inside a bunker deep underground, where radar operators sit hunched in front of glowing green screens. It's World War II now, and here, electricity smells like fear and fried circuits. The radar units hum constantly, fed by thick cabling and heat-heavy vacuum tubes. One operator wipes condensation from his headset and mutters, "It smells off tonight." Another leans in and confirms, "Yeah, smells like the filters are going." Or something's cooking in the panel. That phrase, "something's cooking," has become a universal warning. Because when you're underground, or on a battleship, or in a bunker, you don't wait for alarms. You smell first. You act fast. where you don't get to act at all. Historians still argue whether battlefield success owed more to training, technology, or the unspoken alertness of men who could detect trouble by the faintest tang in the air. Some wrote about it later, in memoirs and letters. I knew the comms would go out an hour before they did. You could feel it in the static and smell it like copper left in vinegar. The military issued technical manuals that began to formally address odor as a diagnostic tool. Smell classifications became standardized in aircraft maintenance checklists. Fighter plane mechanics noted that the scent of a melting resistor could smell like hot chocolate gone sour. Radar techs logged the ozone bloom of overdriven cathode rays. Electric scent was now a codified sense. Back home, meanwhile, consumer goods were being rewired to suit the wartime economy. Radios were mass-produced using cheaper insulation and smaller components. One result? A whole new generation of smells. Step into a 1940s living room, and you'll catch it. Warm Bakelite, buzzy transformers, and a distinct note of old varnish overworked by bad wiring. Families began to recognize the radio's getting tired smell. Some kids grew up thinking that all news broadcasts came with a side of toasted peanut shells and solder smoke. And the television was arriving now. Crack open an early model, big, boxy, filled with tubes and ticking parts, and let it warm up. The room fills slowly with a scent, not unlike fresh laundry passed through a copier. Dust cooks on heating elements. Ionized particles hover in the air. You don't even notice it until it's gone. That's the irony. Electricity, once heralded by smell, now marks its absence with silence and scentlessness. When something no longer smells, when a machine goes too quiet, you worry. And as appliances shrink, tubes replaced by transistors, wires better shielded, the scent begins to fade. Not disappear exactly, but pull back, settle, like a background actor who knows they've had their scene. Yet some folks miss it. One elderly technician interviewed in 1951 laments. Used to be I could tell you what was wrong with a machine from 5 feet away, blindfolded. Now, no smell, no soul. That might be an exaggeration, but not by much. Electricity has gone from thunderstorm in a bottle to invisible bloodstream. It still heats, still powers, still arcs, but it rarely smells unless something's wrong. So here you are, back at the World's Fair, remembering where it all started. Sparks and copper and toasted Bakelite. You breathe deep. The air is cleaner now. But maybe, just maybe, it's a little emptier too. You're in a garage now. Not a mechanic's shop, but a home garage, early 1950s. There's a workbench cluttered with tools, a half-finished model airplane, and in the corner, humming softly, a television set, a soldering iron, and a portable radio cracked open like an egg. This place smells like curiosity. A teenage boy in rolled-up sleeves leans over a circuit board, tongue peeking out the corner of his mouth. The iron touches a metal lead, and with a gentle sizzle, a puff of scent curls up, rosin flux, sweet, piney, chemical, and unmistakable. You know it immediately. That scent becomes the signature of a whole generation of tinkerers, hobbyists, ham radio operators, and future inventors. For them, electricity doesn't come from behind a switch or through a polished appliance. It's something they build, smell, tweak, and yes, occasionally short-circuit with a loud pop and a whiff of toasted regret. This boy, let's call him Sam, sniffs the air instinctively. Too much heat, he says. He flicks off the power and replaces a resistor. His dad pokes his head in from the kitchen. What's burning this time? Sam shrugs. Just a little learning. Historians still argue whether the DIY electronics boom created more engineers or more burnt countertops. But what's certain is this. The scent of electric creation was now being cooked up in basements, garages, and high school science fairs all across the country. The components all had their smells. Carbon resistors, a dry, chalky tang when stressed. Paper capacitors, a nutty pop when overloaded like scorched walnuts. Vacuum tubes, that familiar warm glass and dust blend with a hint of something nostalgic. Even the circuit boards themselves, often coated in phenolic or epoxy resins, release their own subtle burnt syrup smell when overheated. Every mistake left a scent. Every success had a fragrance of its own. You're now in a ham radio shack, a converted attic full of coiled wires, glowing dials, and Morse code tickers. The operator is half asleep, half dreaming in the amber light of the equipment. The air is still, and then the signal drops. A smell rises, warm coil varnish, like a toaster left running without bread. He sits bolt upright. Power surge. Check the antenna relay. He's right. The scent tells him faster than the voltmeter. This connection between electricity and smell, once instinctive, now deeply personal, turns into a kind of technological intimacy. The machines become more than tools. They're companions. You learn their moods. You smell their fatigue. But change is coming. The transistor has arrived, and with it, silence. Efficiency. Coolness. You step into a new kind of lab, 1957. The bench is smaller. The equipment is slicker. No warm glass tubes or glowing filaments. Just tiny black packages, no bigger than a fingernail, doing the work of entire armloads of wire. There's no buzz, no heat, no smell. A young woman frowns at the board. It's not working. Another tech leans over, sniffs once, twice, confused. Can't tell what's wrong, he says. And that's the beginning of the great olfactory silence in electronics. As parts get smaller, cooler, and more insulated, the clues left behind, the scents begin to vanish. Machines don't just stop smelling. They refuse to communicate through the nose anymore. Some people cheer. Finally, clean tech, they say. Others quietly mourn. Still, the flux smell hangs on. So does the rare ozone whisper from a faulty CRT or the faint sugar-burn odor of an overworked capacitor. But now, you need to know what you're missing in order to notice it. You walk through a department store now. The appliances are all shiny and quiet. No hum, no scent. Sleek lines, sealed backs, tidy cords. The washing machine no longer warms the room with the scent of labor. The radio no longer toasts the air with ionized static. And yet, you pass a television demo corner and pause. It's an old model, still running on vacuum tubes. It buzzes softly. The room smells just a little warmer here. You catch it, that blend of ionized dust, paper insulation, and faint varnish. And suddenly, you remember, not a moment exactly, but a feeling, a kind of invisible nostalgia wrapped in heat and ozone. The smell of something working just beyond your understanding. So you linger there for a bit, while the world around you moves on, chasing quieter machines and cleaner circuits. You stand in front of this gently humming box of light and memory, breathing in the faintest scent of history. Now you're in an office. It's the 1960s, and this place hums not with conversation or typewriters, but with something newer, stranger, and honestly a little intimidating. Mainframes. These machines are massive, room-sized giants with blinking lights, whirring tape reels, and cabinets that seem to breathe heat. And with that heat comes a scent, thick and unmistakable. Hot dust, plastic casing, and circuit board varnish. You step closer. The machine in front of you is an IBM System/360. It has more processing power than most cities in the 1800s, and it smells like a library lit by halogen bulbs. There's something sterile and academic in the air. A touch of ionized metal, the gentle odor of paper punched and left too long in a drawer, and beneath it all, that signature scent of warm silicon and tired fans. One technician walks by, stops, sniffs, and says, "We've got thermal drift in rack 4. Smells like we're pushing her too hard." Another nods without looking up. Fan filters probably clogged. Smells like old popcorn. This is a new kind of electric scent. It's professional, but also personal. These computers aren't just machines. They're ecosystems. When something smells wrong, it means hours of troubleshooting, thousands of lines of code double-checked by hand, and maybe, just maybe, a system crash that wipes days of work. So people start to notice the smells. They trust them. The faintest whisper of ozone from the power supply, that's a red flag. The smell of acrylic panels warming under fluorescent light, normal. The sharp chemical twang of a dying capacitor, get the fire extinguisher. Historians still argue whether mainframe culture created or destroyed the tactile experience of technology. But here's something they can't deny. In these cold, climate-controlled rooms, people were still sniffing their way to survival. You now wander into a data storage room. Tape reels spin softly. One misaligned reader lets off a scent like burnt paper in winter air. A woman frowns, swaps it out, and logs the incident in her notebook. Tape 27 smelled hot again. Replaced before crash. That was the protocol. Not voltage, not temperature. Smell. Meanwhile, across the ocean, engineers are working on the next big thing: integrated circuits. Chips the size of a postage stamp that can do the work of 100 vacuum tubes. You're in a clean room at Texas Instruments now, suited head to toe, breathing filtered air that smells like nothing. Absolutely sterile. And that absence, that's new. The air has no story, no warning. If something burns out, it does so silently and without scent. The feedback loop is broken. You lean over a microscope and examine a chip the size of a breadcrumb. It's beautiful, elegant, lifeless. Elsewhere, back in offices, early personal computers are beginning to appear. Not yet common, but present. You sit at a terminal and hear the gentle buzz of a CRT monitor. The casing warms up. The plastic emits that lovely, slightly sweet scent of old electronics, like a vinyl record slowly toasting under a reading lamp. You run your hand along the keyboard. It smells faintly of rubber and time. Not unpleasant, just lived in. A programmer nearby sips coffee and says, if it starts smelling like cinnamon toast, unplug it immediately. You laugh. Until later that day it does. Because here's the thing. Even in the age of digital abstraction, scent hasn't entirely vanished. It's just become anecdotal, a quiet folklore shared among those who still tinker, still open cases, still notice. One engineer tapes a handwritten sign to the server door. Smells like teen voltage? Alert me. And people do. You walk now into a classroom where kids are using early Apple computers. One is fiddling with a power cord. There's a soft pop. A student nearby says, EW, it smells like someone microwaved a sock. The teacher claps her hands. That's why we don't force the plug. That scent of heated silicon, singed dust, and plastic casing becomes a rite of passage. Every early tech user learns it. Most won't forget it. Even arcade machines have their own bouquet. You step into a dim neon cave, surrounded by the blips and beeps of a dozen blinking cabinets. The air smells like sweat, soda syrup, and the distant ozone of CRTs under strain. If a machine fries its power board, the scent hits you instantly. A chemical bite with a popcorny finish. An arcade attendant appears from the shadows and yanks the plug without a word. This age, this brief moment between analog heat and digital cool, is where the last rich scent of electricity lives. You're no longer in awe of it. You don't fear it, but you still notice it. And when the scent shows up, it means something real. A fault, a breakthrough, a lesson. You sit down at a terminal, rest your hand on the warm plastic shell, and breathe in. Not nostalgia, not mystery, just the lingering scent of something human-shaped hidden inside the machine. You're in a bedroom now. It's the 1980s, and instead of the soft hum of a vacuum tube or the static buzz of a glowing CRT, there's something sharper, brighter, synthetic. The room smells like plastic, warm solder, and teenage ambition. A Commodore 64 sits on a particle board desk. The monitor glows blue with command prompts. On the floor, pizza boxes, cassette tapes, and a tangle of power cords so chaotic it might qualify as abstract sculpture. You breathe in vinyl, ozone, and carpet warmed by a nearby power brick. A boy, maybe 13, taps at the keyboard, try to load a basic program. The cassette motor spins, whines, and stalls. A faint whiff of hot circuitry and burned sugar drifts up from the tape deck. He scowls, slaps the side, and mutters every time, "This is the smell of home computing. Not elegant, not mysterious, but lived in and homemade." You can practically feel the static in the air. Touch the monitor screen, and the tiny hairs on your arm stand up. That faint crackle? That's electronic presence. It lives in the room now. You move into the living room, where an early VCR clicks and whirs. The air smells like magnetic tape and patience. Somewhere behind the couch, a plug sparks just a little too loudly, and that familiar bite of ozone and scorched nylon sneaks out. Someone mumbles, "Should really get that looked at." They won't. You see, in this era, people accept a certain amount of electrical background smell. The smell of functionality on the edge of failure. It's almost comforting, a sign that something's still trying its best. At the office, beige boxes hum beneath cubicles. Early Macintosh units, IBM clones, all with fans slightly too small to cool them properly. Tech workers begin to associate their jobs with the scent of heated plastic and burnt coffee, the two becoming indistinguishable after 3 p.m. One admin recalls, "I knew the server was going to crash that day. It smelled like a hot car vent after a thunderstorm." Historians still argue whether the rise of the personal computer reduced the romanticism of electricity. But here's the thing, they're not just machines anymore. They're companions. And companions have moods. You can tell when they're off. A faint tang of electrolytic capacitor fluid? Trouble. The smell of new circuit board resin? Fresh from the factory. The first whiff of burnt resistor? That's your weekend gone. Meanwhile, in classrooms, the Apple II and TRS-80 glow softly. Kids load floppy disks, giggle at Oregon Trail dysentery, and barely notice the chemical warmth of aging cathode tubes and sun-baked ABS plastic. But it's there, drifting around chalk dust and carpet cleaner. The smell of learning through machines. And then there's the arcade again. You step back inside a mall arcade in 1987. There's smoke in the air, not from fire, but from excitement. Cigarettes, yeah, they still allow it. Fryer oil from the food court, and the distinct tang of cathode ray tube tension. You press your palms to a Mortal Kombat cabinet. It's hot. The fan isn't working well. It smells like melted fan belt and peppermint gum. Somehow, someone kicks the machine. The picture flickers. The air crackles. Back in your home, there's a boom box by the bed, playing cassette tapes, powering tiny lights, heating up gently. You lie on the floor, nose level with the vents, and breathe in metal, foam, magnet, and the scent of Saturday night. It's a heady mix of electronic intimacy. Even the early game consoles, the NES, the Sega, had their own aroma. Pop open a cartridge slot after a long play session and you'll catch it. Warm silicone, slightly toasted copper contacts, and that distinctive hint of plastic worn smooth by enthusiasm. And yet, something's shifting. Machines are running cooler. Smaller chips mean less heat. Insulated casings mean fewer escape scents. You start to lose those little olfactory signals. Now, if something smells, it's a problem. One kid at a sleepover yells, "Why does the Super Nintendo smell like fire?" Someone else shouts, "Turn it off. It smells like doom." It's not all drama, though. There are still good smells. The comforting puff of a laser printer warming up like a cross between popcorn and static. The sharp, plasticky aroma of opening a brand new modem, fresh from a box. You close your eyes and remember your first login dial tone. The smell was just as much part of the memory. This is an era of layered nostalgia. Every scent is tied to 1,000 moments. Burnt circuit board? That time you tried to fix the VCR and made it worse. Ozone? The night you stayed up all night coding on your 286, waiting for it to compile something magical. Even now, as we march towards sleeker, scentless design, there's a part of you that still leans in when a fan kicks on, still lifts the lid on an old machine, still notices the change in the air. Because those smells, they were your first internet, your first friend who spoke in binary, your first sign that something incredible was happening just beneath the surface. And even now, in a world of glass screens and silent chips, that ghost of a smell still lingers in your memory. A vapor trail of heat, code, and home. You're walking through a tech startup office somewhere in Silicon Valley, early 1990s. Gone are the dark server rooms and static charge carpets. Here, it smells like espresso, whiteboard markers, and ambition. But wait, beneath the surface notes of productivity and freshly unboxed optimism, there's something else. Electricity. It's quieter now, subtler. It doesn't spark or sizzle. It hums politely. You pass a row of beige desktops, clunky but beloved. Macintoshes with rainbow logos. Gateway towers still smelling faintly of corrugated cardboard and cheap solder. The air conditioning keeps everything cool, but where the vents don't reach, there's a scent you know, hot plastic, dry fan belts, and the occasional whisper of ozone. An intern leans over a monitor and sniffs the back casing. "I think this one's overheating," she says casually, like she's checking for moldy bread. She's not wrong. There's that soft, nutty, almost sweet note of cooked capacitor, faint as a memory, but clear enough to spell trouble. You might think by this point in history that people would have stopped trusting their noses, but they haven't. In fact, in these years of early internet expansion, your nose becomes a kind of backup system. Modems buzz and hiss. Monitors warm the air. And if something smells like burnt raisins and optimism, you know someone's about to lose a few hours of work. The rise of the home office brings its own flavor. Dusty carpet, spilled Mountain Dew, pizza box grease, and under it all, the tang of cheap power supplies doing their very best. People joke that their computer smells like finals week. It's not a metaphor. Historians still argue whether the dot-com boom was driven more by innovation or caffeine and arson-level wiring. But those who were there remember the smell of early online life. Dial-up hum, soldered motherboards, and the faint thermal aroma of promise. You step now into a college dorm room. There's a LAN party going. Cables snake across the floor like vines. Towers stacked too high blink in the dark. And the smell? Oh, it's rich. Plastic fans on overtime, warm GPUs, and the unmistakable scent of compressed air that just failed to clean anything. One guy suddenly yells, "Yo, it smells like my video card's dying." Another sniffs the air, nods gravely, and says, "Yeah, fried glue and disappointment." They're right. And now you're back at an office, bigger, shinier, air-conditioned within an inch of its life. Everything is branded, slick, and chrome-edged. The scent of electricity is nearly gone. Nearly. Because you notice it when the printer jams, that plasticky, hot rubber smell like a melting Lego. Or when the monitor flickers just once, and the air sharpens like static on your tongue. Or when someone plugs in the overhead projector and everyone winces at the familiar reek of burnt dust on a halogen bulb. It's not constant, not predictable, but it's there. Meanwhile, at home, your electronics are multiplying. Consoles, PCs, laptops, routers, modems. You learn to identify them by smell. The Xbox, warm leather and baking circuitry. The PlayStation, slightly acidic plastic and whatever's cooking inside its fan vents. The printer, a mix of burnt toner and existential dread. There's a story you remember, a guy who tried to overclock his Pentium processor and forgot to upgrade the fan. The room smelled like toast and despair, he said, just before his motherboard curled like a potato chip. Some smells become urban legend. Smell like maple syrup? That's your GPU crying. If it smells like fresh paint, check the RAM. Seriously, sweet and sharp? That's not candy. That's your UPS melting down. People begin documenting these. Forums fill with posts like, "Help, my PC smells like burning crayons." "Is it bad if my router smells like pine?" Spoiler, yes. Yes, it's bad. This is also the age of modding. People install neon fans, custom cases, liquid cooling. And with it comes a new suite of smells, coolant leaks, acrid, like battery acid, thermal paste, sweet but strangely metallic, and solder smoke, still piney, still dangerous. You're in someone's garage again. Not a dusty, dad-style garage, but a full-blown tech temple. There's a 3D printer chugging in the corner. The air smells like burnt spaghetti and hot glue sticks. Resin from prints. Melting filament. You breathe it in and think. This is what modern electricity smells like. We come a long way from the arc lamps of the 18th century. Electricity no longer smells like panic or spectacle. It smells like persistence, like tinkering, like late nights and big ideas and maybe, if you're lucky, something just on the edge of breaking through. So you sit down at your old laptop, rest your hands on the warm keyboard, and breathe deep. The battery is puffing slightly. The fan stutters once, then steadies. There it is again, just the faintest trace of burnt almonds and ambition. It's not a crisis. Not yet. Just the system saying hello. Now you're in a cafe. But not just any cafe. It's 2007, and you're surrounded by laptops, lattes, and low-level anxiety. You know the type? Edison bulbs, indie playlists, and a dozen MacBooks glowing softly beneath a haze of espresso steam. The air smells like coffee grinds, Wi-Fi, and warming lithium. It's a far cry from the labs and bunkers of a century ago. But electricity is still everywhere. You just don't see it anymore, and you rarely hear it. But now and then, if you really pay attention, you can still smell it. A girl 2 tables over plugs in her charger. There's a subtle crackle as the connector slides home, and for half a second, you catch it. A spark smell, almost metallic. Brief, private, gone before you can name it. Electricity is slipping further behind the curtain. You close your laptop for a break and rub your fingers along the power brick tucked under the table. It's warm, too warm. You lift it to your nose. Yep, that familiar scent of cheap insulation, toasty rubber, and the faintest suggestion of panic. You slide it further from the coffee puddle and hope for the best. That smell? It's still a language. Only now, fewer people speak it. You walk next into a college dorm again, but this time it's different. Everyone's connected. Phones, tablets, laptops, Bluetooth speakers. The air hums with activity. And yet, the air is scentless. The electronics run cooler now. The components are shielded, the batteries sleek and calm, until they're not. Because sometimes one overheats, and then the air changes. Historians still argue whether the 2000s marked the death of tactile computing, but many agree on one thing. The sin of failure became rarer, but far more serious. You probably remember the first time you heard about a phone battery catching fire. Maybe you were even there when someone's iPhone puffed up like a marshmallow in a microwave. The smell? Not your usual singed plastic. It's acidic, sharp, and chemical like sour grapes and burnt wires. A scent you can't wash off your memory. Technicians learn to recognize it quickly. A lithium battery gone bad smells cold. Somehow. Not hot. It's the opposite of comforting. You unplug, move back, and try not to breathe it in. Even worse, no smell at all. In the era of cloud servers and silent CPUs, many failures don't come with a scent. The hard drive dies quietly. The data disappears without drama. But every so often, a server room gives off that old-school warning. The scent of dusty fans, burnt-out ball bearings, and fried interface boards. You're in a data center now. It's loud, racks whirring, fans spinning. The air is refrigerated to protect the machines. But something's wrong. A technician walks by, stops mid-step, and turns back. Smells like we're about to lose a switch. She's right. Somewhere, a power supply's insulation is cooking just enough to change the air. It's the smell of hot glue and dusty panic. They fix it. No one else notices. But she'll remember. Meanwhile, consumer tech is trying harder than ever to disappear. Smartphones, tablets, smartwatches, all sealed shut. No smells allowed. You can't even replace the battery without a heat gun. But the heat? Still there. You hold your phone to your face after a 2-hour Zoom call. It's slightly warm, and if you pay close attention, really close, you'll catch it. The faint scent of electronic breath, just like old laptop fans exhaling through the keyboard. Even chargers carry a story. Knockoff cables, especially. You plug one into a wall outlet, and suddenly the room smells like new car plastic and impending lawsuits. You unplug immediately. There's an open question among tech reviewers. Is it possible to design good-smelling tech? A few startups try. Wooden phone cases, leather-bound tablets, natural laptops. But eventually, they all smell like warmed-up ambition and failed Kickstarter campaigns. Still, a few smells linger. The first time you open a new laptop, clean plastic, cool metal, a little bit of packing foam. The smell of a 3D printer, burnt sugar and determination. That weird moment when a router reboots, static in the sinuses, and a ghost of something not quite burnt. And there are legends. If your phone smells like strawberries, it's already too late. That sweet smell? That's your console whispering goodbye. If it smells like a hot coin, you should have backed up yesterday. You're back home now. Late night. Just a desk lamp and your aging desktop. You lean in, listen to the fan, and there it is, the soft, sleepy scent of worn plastic and quiet electricity. Nothing's burning. Not yet. But it's trying. And in a world that's gone almost scentless, almost too perfect, there's comfort in that little puff of warmth. That sign that inside this silent black box, something is alive and working. Now you're sitting in the quiet hum of the 2020s, where nearly everything is wireless, silent, and sealed tight. Devices slip in and out of sleep without so much as a blink. Your desk is minimalist. Your cables are braided. Your mouse glides on a glass pad like it's skating. And the air? Clean. Too clean. You wave your hand near the vents of your ultra-thin laptop. Nothing. No warmth. No scent. It's like the thing doesn't even exist when it's not lighting up. A technological ghost. But then, you boot up a rendering program. Fans spin. The CPU groans. You feel a trace of heat escape. And with it, just for a second, the faintest smell of metal and melted dust, like a candle that was never lit properly. It's there, and gone. You lean in, maybe even a little too eagerly. Because in this scentless era, every whisper of the old electricity feels like a secret. You're not alone in this. Tech forums are full of posts with titles like, "My laptop smells like toast, should I panic? Why does my GPU smell like a hairdryer? Sweet smell coming from charger. Is that normal?" Spoiler again, it's never normal. There's one particularly viral post from 2021. Smelled strawberries. Laptop shut off. Whole motherboard fried. Can someone explain? Turns out, a capacitor burst. The electrolyte mixture in some models really did have a sweet, fruity note, like melted candy and regret. Historians still argue whether our digital tools have become too insulated from our senses. Some say we've entered the age of sterile tech, machines designed to erase their own presence unless summoned. No noise, no heat, no smell. But in certain corners, things are different. You're in a makerspace now. A garage? A basement? It's hard to tell. It's all wires, LEDs, and the quiet crackle of experimentation. Someone's building a custom mechanical keyboard. Someone else is programming a drone. The smell in the room is unmistakable. Flux smoke, PLA filament, acrylic, and stubborn ambition. There's warmth here. The kind of warmth you remember from the radio days. Not just thermal warmth, but emotional. The smell of people still creating. In another corner, someone's opened a Raspberry Pi kit. The air smells like cardboard, zip ties, and future problems. A tiny fan kicks on with the sound of a whisper. The user leans in and grins. Smells like progress. There's something wonderfully retro about this scene. Even in a world of slick, sealed devices, this little space reclaims the scent of electricity. Not because something's wrong, but because something's happening. At home, you try it yourself. You order an old CRT from eBay, one of those beige monsters from the late 90s. It arrives in a battered box that smells like someone's attic. You plug it in, and then, whomp, the screen flickers on with that familiar electrostatic pop, and the air changes. That smell, ionized air, sharp and tangy, like a lightning storm in miniature. Dust heating on warm glass. That faint metallic bite at the back of your throat. You're not imagining it. You breathe it in like a secret handshake, and then the monitor lets out a low whine. The picture stabilizes and the smell fades. But you remember. Your whole body remembers. You're not chasing nostalgia. You're following a trail of forgotten signals, hints in the air that told generations when something was working, dying, or just maybe about to change the world. Because even now, even in the quiet age of whisper-thin laptops and smart everything, the scent of electricity still flickers through the cracks. You just have to pay attention. Like when your smart home hub starts running hot and gives off a tang of melting plastic wrap. Or when a USB-C charger hums wrong and smells like a curling iron left on too long. Or when your VR headset warms up your forehead and releases a scent oddly reminiscent of a new toy opened on Christmas morning. Every once in a while, the ghost of the old world returns. It smells like tension and curiosity, and you can't help but smile. You step away from your desk. The lights dim automatically. The fan's slow. The air cools. For a moment, everything is still. Then your smart speaker crackles softly and says, "Battery low." And just before the shutdown chime, you smell it. That tiny puff of something electronic and warm and real. Just enough to remind you that behind the magic, there's still a machine. You're standing now in a tech recycling center, the graveyard of forgotten gadgets. Towering bins of cracked smartphones, yellowed monitors, tangled cords. Each pile a quiet echo of someone's once precious purchase. And here, electricity doesn't just whisper its scent. It hangs in the air. The whole place smells like burnt plastic, corroded batteries, and history melting down. You walk between the aisles and breathe it in. Scorched circuit boards, expired thermal paste, the bittersweet perfume of capacitors that gave up quietly long ago. One worker opens the back of an old CRT television. A snap of static leaps from the casing, and instantly the scent hits. Ozone and ghost dust, like the aftertaste of a thunderstorm sealed in a time capsule. This is where electricity comes to rest. But even in death, it smells alive. You lean over a pile of translucent IMAX shells. Remember those? And catch a note of warm Apple plastic and anxious startup chimes. One of them still blinks feebly when plugged in, like a heartbeat under a blanket. A technician chuckles. Smells like the 90s tried to reboot itself. Historians still argue whether e-waste is a symbol of progress or carelessness. But no one disputes this. Every era of electricity leaves behind a scent, and here, you can smell them all layered on top of each other. You move to a shelf of half-melted power bricks, and one of them lets off the unmistakable odor of old-school fear, sharp, acidic, just on the edge of call the fire department. Another shelf holds printers, their rollers stiff with dried ink and a whiff of burnt paper and broken promises. A guy walks by, holding a melted external hard drive like it's radioactive. "Still smells like Hot Wheels," he mutters. You nod. He's not wrong. In one corner, there's a pallet of laptops wrapped in cling film. Their batteries are bloated, distended like overfed ticks. A sign warns, "Do not stack, risk of fire." You read it, and even before your eyes confirm, your nose knows. That plastic-sweet smell of lithium decay, sour and metallic, like sadness wrapped in static. Someone nearby sneezes. You both laugh. Probably just inhaled 2005, they say, but it's not all grim. One technician is carefully disassembling an old tube radio. It's humming softly, somehow still alive. The wood casing smells like library shelves and dust warmed by sun. And inside, that cozy electric scent, the blend of warm coils, varnished wire, and maybe a hint of pipe tobacco from a previous owner. He smiles as he works. Some of these old ones still have stories left in them. You believe him, because every device, every forgotten gadget, every obsolete cable, every fried motherboard carries the aroma of its working life. And even when it fails, it smells like something trying. Elsewhere in the center, a class of students on a field trip crowds around an open server rack. The guide invites them to take a deep breath. "That's the smell of data that mattered," she says. "Backups, losses, ideas, all of it baked into this cabinet." The kids wrinkle their noses. One says, "It smells like burnt toast and pencil shavings." Exactly, because electric smell isn't always noble. Sometimes it's just mundane and fried and ordinary. But that doesn't make it meaningless. In fact, the most powerful thing about these smells is how they make you feel: alert, nostalgic, cautious, amused, connected. Later, outside, the breeze hits your face clean and fresh. And for a moment, you miss the inside air, weirdly comforting like a basement full of unfinished projects. You glance back through the glass at rows of blinking, dying machines. Some people see trash. You see memories made physical, scented with effort, laced with invention. And if you listen carefully between the fans and the sighs of old capacitors, you can almost hear the machines whisper. "I mattered once. I warmed the air. Now you're walking through a museum. Not the kind with marble floors and velvet ropes, but a tech museum where the lights are low, the labels are pixelated, and the air smells strangely familiar. Electricity lives here, tucked inside glass cases and restored displays, quietly humming like a memory you forgot you had. You pass a display labeled Early Computing, 1940s to 1970s. Behind the plexiglass, a UNIVAC, a PDP-8, a reel-to-reel tape machine. They aren't running, but you swear you can still smell them. Metal housing warmed by vacuum tubes, canvas belts, and the dry, woody odor of oil paper capacitors. You lean in. Yep, history has a scent. A staff member walks by pushing a cart with vintage power supplies. As it rolls past, the air fills with hot Bakelite and cracked insulation, like someone's garage on a rainy day. You nod. It's weirdly comforting. Nearby, a group of kids giggle at an interactive display. Build your own circuit. They press buttons, light bulbs flicker, and a small puff of flux, smoke escapes from a soldering demo station. One kid waves their hand. It smells like pine trees and burnt marshmallows. The docent laughs. That's rosin flux. Old school electronics smell. Historians still argue whether preserving the physical experience of tech, including the smells, is essential. Some think it's sentimental nonsense. Others insist that without it, you're only telling half the story. You walk through an exhibit on home computers of the 80s. There's a Macintosh 128K next to a Commodore 64. The displays loop old commercials on tiny CRT screens. One of the monitors flickers. You smell that unmistakable sweet dust CRT smell, like a static-charged library. Behind you, someone says, "That takes me back." You don't even need to ask where. You keep moving. There's a hallway labeled electricity before electronics. Inside, displays of 18th century friction machines, Leyden jars, and early galvanometers. And yes, someone's recreated a sulfur globe machine, complete with a glass rod and cloth for generating sparks. The air smells like wool, scorched air, and lemon oil, and for a split second, you feel the hair on your arm lift. Not fear, just voltage. A tiny lightning storm from another century. In the center of the room, a Faraday cage stands surrounded by copper wire and Tesla coils. A docent gives a demonstration, flipping a switch. Blue sparks crackle. The air shimmers with ozone, and the smell is primal, metallic, dry, almost spicy. You breathe it in like a traveler smelling the first fire of home. And then comes the final gallery, the smell of progress. A tongue-in-cheek exhibit, but accurate. Small vents pump the scents of each era into the air. You walk past them slowly. 1920s, Bakelite radios and coal-fired power stations. 1940s, hot oil capacitors and rubber insulation. 1960s, PCB varnish and vacuum tube perfume. 1980s, fan-blown dust and coffee-stained keyboards. 2000s, scentless, quiet, an air freshener that tried too hard. 2020s, the ghost of ozone and lithium fatigue. Each scent lingers just long enough to trigger something. A forgotten project, a school app, the first time you smelled something wrong and learned to fix it. You sit down at a recreation desk from 1999. An old CRT monitor buzzes faintly. There's a clunky mouse, a stiff keyboard, and a desktop tower you could hide a body in. You tap the spacebar. The machine purrs to life. And there it is. That smell. Not dramatic. Not dangerous. Just present. A combination of aging plastic, micro-heated dust, and spinning fans pushing warmth into the room like a secret handshake from the past. A child walks by and says, "What's that smell?" You smile. That's what computers used to feel like. Because once upon a time, before the sealed edges and silent chips, machines were as alive as we were. They smelled like they meant something. They told you when they were working. And here, in this little corner of preservation, they still do. You're home again, but not in the present. Not quite. You've dragged an old desktop tower out of the closet. One of those chunky mid-2000s builds with a clear side panel and a long-forgotten neon fan. It's dusty, a little discolored, and surprisingly heavy. You set it on the table like a relic, and for a moment, you hesitate. Then you plug it in. The fans roar to life with a sound you haven't heard in years. And with that noise comes a rush of scent, like a door opening into a forgotten room. It smells like time travel. Warm plastic, exhausted thermal paste, and the sharp twang of oxidized connectors. The kind of scent that makes you pause, not because it's bad, but because it's real. It smells like the hours you once spent gaming in the dark, coding in your hoodie, burning CDs you labeled in Sharpie. This machine isn't just hardware. It's a scented diary. The DVD drive whirs open slowly, dust lifting into the air like ash from a campfire. Inside, a forgotten disc, mixed 2006. The case smells like old carpet, lint, and ambition. You load it. It works. And suddenly, your ears are full of bass and nostalgia, and your nose is deep in the history of a life once electric. Historians still argue whether personal computing ever achieved true intimacy. But those who lived through it, they know. Because you didn't just hear or see your computer working. You smelled it. Over in the corner, your modern laptop sits, silent, cool, impersonal. You touch it. It feels like a prop, a tool, but not a companion. This tower, on the other hand, it's breathing again. The CPU is heating up gently. The power supply is purring. You reach around back and catch a puff of low-grade ozone and 10-year-old dust, and it makes you smile like a reunion with an old friend. You remember the smell of crisis, the moment your hard drive failed, and the room filled with burnt varnish and silent horror. Or the time your GPU overheated during a summer gaming session and you swore it smelled like microwave crayons. But this moment is comfort. You pull out a can of compressed air and begin to clean. A cloud of dust swirls, and with it comes a cocktail of scents. Fabric softener from the carpet, a hint of sweat from marathon work sessions, and that wonderful, musty electronic smell that only comes with time and patience. Somewhere, a fan blade flicks against its housing with a soft tick. It's not a problem. Just a reminder that this machine was touched by human hands. You don't even want to turn on the monitor. Just sitting here with this tower humming beside you is enough. It feels like sitting beside a campfire made of plastic and copper. You walk into the kitchen to grab a drink, and when you come back, you smell it before you see it. It smells alive. Not alive in the way a new iPhone feels, sleek and distant, but alive like a cat on your keyboard or a friend who still remembers your old passwords. You sit back down and lean your head close. That smell, a mixture of burnt solder, keyboard oil, fan dust, and latent effort, fills your chest with something you didn't expect. Gratitude. Because in a world where everything is increasingly touchless, speech-controlled, and airless, there's something powerful about a machine that reminds you it exists. That it has presence. That it will let you know, gently or dramatically, when something is right or very, very wrong. You reach under the desk and shut it down. The fans spin down. The lights fade. And in that silence, the last warm breath of the machine drifts into the room. Not quite burnt, not quite sweet. Just there. You breathe it in. You remember. And for a little while longer, you sit in the dark with that fading scent of electricity curling around you like memory itself. Now you're in a hospital room. Modern, bright, clean, sterile in a way that scrubs the world of scent, of error, of humanity. The machines are silent. The air is scrubbed. Every wire is tucked behind plastic walls and color-coded ports. You sit in a plastic chair beside a hospital bed, and all you can hear is the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. To most people, it's just background. But to you, it's electricity speaking softly. You glance at the four-pump. There's a slight warmth radiating from it, almost imperceptible. You lean in, just a whisper of hot casing, maybe antiseptic-scented circuitry. A reminder that electricity lives even here, disguised, disciplined, but never truly gone. You shift in your seat. A nurse walks in, checks the machine, nods. You ask if everything's okay. She says if something was wrong, it would smell like it. You're not surprised, because in hospitals, tech failure has a scent. Burnt fuse in the portable x-ray unit smells like hot laminate and adrenaline. Battery leak in a defibrillator, sour plastic and anxiety. A dying monitor? You'd know by the sudden tang of cooked capacitors and clinical panic. These machines don't get second chances. That's why the people who work here, who really know them, trust their noses as much as their training. Historians still argue whether modern hospitals are too reliant on technology, but ask any nurse what something's supposed to smell like, and they'll tell you. It should smell like nothing. If it smells like something, we have a problem. You're struck by the tension. These are life machines, and yet their silence and scentlessness make them seem ghostly. You start to miss the whir, the buzz, the comforting crackle of something alive and barely contained. But even here, sometimes the old rules return. A maintenance worker rolls in a portable ventilator. Hooks it up. The motor kicks in. You catch it, a hint of rubber and motor oil, a scent that cuts through bleach and floral air freshener like a knife. He wipes the casing with alcohol and mutters, "Don't worry. It always smells like that on startup." He's right. Some of these machines still fight to be noticed, still speak through scent, when their beeps and buzzes fall short. You wonder how many times something was caught just because someone smelled it first. You walk past a cart of spare monitors. They're stacked like pancakes, wires coiled and labeled. The whole cart smells faintly of plastic fatigue and wiped down anxiety. A doctor walks by, barely notices it, but you do. That smell is a kind of ambient memory. It lingers. Later, you find yourself in the waiting room. The vending machine next to you hums faintly. It's older, with a slightly crooked LED display. You reach for a soda, and as the can drops, the machine clunks and exhales a breath of refrigerant and electric dust. You breathe it in, and somehow you feel better. Because even here, amid antiseptic lighting and bleached floors, electricity smells like something human. You pull out your phone, tap the screen. It unlocks with no fanfare, no warmth, no scent. A perfect device in a perfect room. You look at it and think, this little glass box will never smell like anything at all. But the old nurse behind the front desk is tapping on a creaky desktop. It's humming louder than it should. You walk past and catch it. Hot fan air, slowly burning dust, and a hint of inkjet toner from the nearby printer. She doesn't seem to mind. She trusts it. She knows it. You leave the hospital a little later, stepping into the night air. It's cool, sharp, free. But under your collar, in your clothes, in your nostrils, you carry the faintest traces of electric presence. Not danger, not awe, just vigilance. The smell of machines that stand between life and everything else. You drive home with the windows down. The car hums. The dashboard flickers. And again, you breathe in that familiar modern cocktail of synthetic leather, charging batteries, and digital breath. Not overwhelming, not intrusive, just enough to say, I'm here, still running. Now you're inside a spaceship. Well, not flying through space exactly. More like standing on the ground floor of a space museum, next to an open replica of an Apollo command module. There's no glass between you and it, no barrier between the past and your nose. You lean in close, and there it is, the smell of electricity in confinement. Warmed metal, aged plastics, faintly sour Velcro, and beneath it all, the ghost of burnt circuitry and body heat sealed into airless capsules. If you've never smelled baked electronics in a metal can, you'd think this was fake. But your senses don't lie. This is the scent of survival on the edge of nothing. Nearby, a display describes what astronauts reported smelling after re-entry, when a hatch opened and lunar dust drifted in on their suits. They called it burnt gunpowder. Acrid, sharp, familiar. Historians still argue whether that scent came from the dust, the suits, or the electrified atmosphere of the spacecraft itself. Whatever the source, every account agrees it lingered. It filled the cabin, stubborn and unforgettable. You imagine it, floating in a metal can hundreds of thousands of miles from Earth, surrounded by panels blinking softly, machines humming, wires tucked into walls, fans pushing recycled air through filters. And still, even there, a smell. Electricity doing its job, whispering in ions. The smell of everything holding together. Barely. You step back from the module and walk deeper into the museum. The next exhibit, the shuttle era. Sleeker, larger. But even the astronauts of the 80s and 90s talked about that faint scent of baked wiring, like an old toaster in the middle of a science experiment. You stop at a touch screen and tap a video of a retired mission commander. He chuckles as he recalls a moment during descent when a cabin panel got hot. You could smell it before anyone said a word. It was just hot plastic and fear. You can almost feel it, the shift from routine to awareness. One inhalation away from action. Even now, in modern capsules like SpaceX's Crew Dragon, where nearly everything is digital, sealed, whisper quiet, the engineers admit that if a system overheats, your nose still knows first. They've installed sensors, alarms, but sometimes a faint smell creeping through a fan is faster. You enter a small side room where a mock-up of a space station module stands. Inside, the scent is layered. Vacuum-sealed food, rubber tubing, plastic fatigued by recycled air, heat-exchanged metal. And yes, beneath it, a subtle thread of old electronics working overtime. Astronauts, when they return, describe the ISS's scent as a mix of machinery and warm sweat in a dry room. You believe it. There's a quote etched into the wall. In space, there's no weather, but your tech breathes, and you can smell when it's tired. You stare at it for a long time, because you know exactly what that means. A few feet away, a technician runs a demonstration. A small ion thruster lights up in a chamber. You can't smell it directly, but the air venting from the back of the unit carries just a trace of something odd. Ozone, scorched foil, and faintly metallic breath. Even new technology can't help but announce itself if you know how to listen with your nose. You leave the exhibit and step outside into the fresh air. But part of you stays in that capsule, in that quiet world where every scent means something important. Back at home, you pull up a live stream of the International Space Station. You watch them float through modules, tools clipped to belts, laptops open, fans buzzing just under the camera's mic. And you wonder, when their systems heat up slightly, when the 3D printer has a hiccup, when a wire is 1 degree too warm, do they breathe in and think? That's odd, because even in space, where there's no fresh air, you still smell electricity. And it smells like trust, like focus, like a reminder that this machine, this little engineered miracle, is still alive with effort. Now you're somewhere strange. Not a lab, not a home, not a museum or machine shop. You're in a dream, maybe a memory suspended in time. The walls around you shimmer faintly, like static on an old television. You can't quite tell what's real, but one thing is clear. The air smells electric. It's not harsh, not frightening. It's the warm, familiar scent of waking up in front of a computer you left running overnight, of circuits sighing into rest mode, of a screen that never went to sleep. You move through this place slowly. Every step feels like it takes you backward and forward at once. Through childhood bedrooms lit by CRT glow, university computer labs reeking of coffee and ozone, startup offices that smelled like ambition and overheated chargers. You touch a wall, and it pulses faintly. Behind it, you hear fans. Not loud, just enough to say, "I'm working." You remember a night in 2011 when your router began to fail. First, the signal flickered. Then the smell arrived. Faint, sweet, chemical, like melting Legos and low-grade panic. You knew before the lights blinked out. Your nose knew. It always did. Now, in this dream space, every scent returns at once. The tang of brand new plastic wrap peeled from a graphics card. The musty, scorched paper smell of an overheated office printer. The comforting aroma of old-school LAN parties. Carpet dust, cola, thermal paste, and pizza boxes teetering near power strips. You pass a window. Outside, it's raining. Inside, you're surrounded by the past lives of machines. One whiff, and you're back in a friend's garage, building a PC from hand-me-down parts. The fan kicks in. It smells like sawdust and promise. Historians still argue whether the human sense of smell evolved more for survival or nostalgia. But you're convinced it's both. Because in that moment when something starts to burn, or heat, or hum, you don't just remember. You react. That first whiff is what moves you. You sit on a bench in the middle of this imaginary machine library. A Commodore hums gently to your left. A 486 tower buzzes to your right. Above, hanging like forgotten stars, float tiny bursts of olfactory memory. A lithium swell, a CRT whisper, a modem's dry breath. Each one flickers like a campfire. Each one smells like time. And it's quiet, deep, sleep-inducing quiet, but not sterile. The scent in the air is like the inside of a warm, battery-powered radio, the kind your grandfather let you tinker with in his shed. You were 9. You burned your finger. The whole shed smelled like wood shavings, melted copper, and adventure. You close your eyes. The smell shifts. Now it's the inside of a Game Boy after the batteries have been removed. That faint, sticky scent of old rubber, plastic fatigue, and thumbprint memories. Or the smell of an old speaker you found at a garage sale. One that worked just long enough to fill a room with crackly joy before failing with a soft pop and a smoky sigh. You open your eyes. The bench is gone. You're standing again in the dark. The only light now comes from an unseen source, cool, blue, and flickering like a charging icon stuck at 99%. You feel warmth on your face. And the smell? It's that same soft, sleepy electronic breath. A fan winding down, a screen fading to black, a device settling in a quiet oblivion. You smile, because in this drifting, liminal space of forgotten electricity of all the senses available to you, vision, hearing, touch, it's smell that never lies. It tells you when something's wrong. It tells you when something's gone. It tells you, gently, when something once mattered. You reach out your hand, feel the air pulse once more, and then everything fades. Not like a shutdown, not like an alarm, like a sigh. And the last thing you smell before the dream dissolves is old solder, warm keys, and one last flicker of static honesty. Now you're outside, at night, alone, under a telephone pole humming softly in the dark. The stars are just barely visible through the clouds. You look up, and the cross arms stretch across the sky like bones of an ancient beast. The wires sing, not loudly, but insistently, like a voice you can't quite understand. And there, in the stillness, you smell it. Electric wind. It's subtle but real. The faint scent of damp air passing through charged lines, of creosote-soaked wood warming under strain, of ozone curling invisibly through a restless sky. You breathe it in, and suddenly, you're everywhere. A footstep away from the electric frontier. Back in a thunderstorm when you were 10, right before the lightning struck the neighbor's tree. In the parking lot outside a substation, wondering if it was safe to walk by. You smell tension, because raw, outdoor electricity, untamed, unhidden, smells different. Not the cozy warmth of a desktop tower or the sleep breath of a laptop. This is hard power. It smells like metal fear, like the taste of nickels on your tongue after touching the wrong doorknob in winter. You press your palm against the wooden pole. It vibrates faintly, a current running above you, doing its job in total silence. The air pulses again. Your hair rises just a little. A car passes. You step away, but the scent lingers on your skin. A mix of cold humidity and ionized truth. Further down the block, a streetlight flickers. You walk toward it. The ballast is failing. You know that smell. Overheated enamel, burnt tungsten, and the soft, bitter hint of a system at its limit. No one else notices, but you do. That smell is a whisper, a confession. I'm not okay. Historians still argue whether cities have their own electrical dialects. Some say New York smells like steam and sparks. Others claim Tokyo hums with lithium ghosts and climate-controlled precision. But almost everyone agrees. Where there's infrastructure, there's a scent. You pass a power box mounted to the curb. It hums beneath your feet. Its warmth has leaked into the sidewalk. And as you kneel, you smell cool metal housing, asphalt oil, and something faintly like battery acid in winter air. You touch the casing gently. It vibrates like a distant drumbeat. Nothing is burning. Not yet. But everything is alive. You stand and keep walking. Past the bus stop with its overheating LED screen. Smells like hot glue and tired pixels. Past the restaurant's neon sign. Humming like an angry fly. Smells like old gas and forgotten glass. Past a bundle of tangled telecom wires zip-tied to a pole. Smells like rubber bands and metal regret. Everywhere, electricity lives, even when it pretends not to. Even when it's buried, muted, shielded, it still reaches you through scent. You stop at the end of your street. Above you, the transformer on the pole lets out a low thrum. just for a second, a gentle breeze pushes past, and in it you catch something that shouldn't be there. Sweetness. A sickly, syrupy note that doesn't belong outside. You know what that means. You take a step back, just as a loud pop cracks through the air. The light above goes out. The hum stops. Silence. Darkness. Then a soft hiss. And in that moment, before the world returns, you smell it. Burnt oil, scorched copper, and the fading ghost of a system trying not to die. It's okay. No fire. No emergency. But your nose knew first. You take one last look at the pole, still steaming in the cool night air. And you think, electricity doesn't just power the world. It perfumes it. Now you're back indoors, but not at home. You're in a data center. The moment you step in, the smell hits you. Not strong, not foul, just unmistakable. It's the scent of air that's been filtered, chilled, and ionically scrubbed, but still can't hide the truth underneath. You breathe it in. Metal, dustless plastic, cool silicon exhale, and somewhere deep beneath it all, the quiet heat of thinking machines. Rows upon rows of server racks blink at you with green and amber eyes. Their fans create a constant, low roar, like a distant waterfall made of ones and zeros. The room is sealed tight, climate-controlled, perfectly optimized, yet it smells alive. Not organic, no, but present, like the breath of a dragon that learned to do math. You trail your hand along a locked cabinet. The warmth is subtle, less like fire, more like confidence. A technician in a hoodie glides past with a rolling cart and a barcode scanner. He doesn't speak, but you catch the faintest trail behind him. Cable ties, static guard spray, and overclocked coffee. He vanishes between the racks like a monk among sacred scrolls. And really, that's what this feels like. A temple to electricity, where data is scripture and the smell is worship. Historians still argue whether data has a physical weight, but anyone who's stood in a room like this knows. It has scent, not dramatic like a burning tower, not cozy like a desktop, just a persistent, sterile warmth, like thought made physical. You reach a corner of the center where some older servers live. Legacy machines, still operational, still valued, and they smell different. Fainter fans, older grease, slightly more warmth in the exhale. One of them has a sticky note on it that reads, "Don't restart, finicky." You smile. You've known that kind of machine. It smells like a dog that only listens to one person. Obstinate, reliable, and full of quirks. A panel light flashes red. A technician moves fast, already reaching for a drive. As he unmounts the casing, a tiny cloud of warm copper dust hits the air. It's gone a moment, but you felt it. That split-second warning before heat becomes hazard. They log the replacement, check the backups, and breathe easier. Because they knew before the alarm. The nose always knows. Elsewhere, a massive cooling unit kicks in with a humph, sending a burst of super-chilled air down the aisle. You feel it pass over your skin. Under it, the clean whisper of condensation, epoxy resin, and air too sterile to be outside. The scent makes your eyes blink. Not because it's strong, because it's precise. This air has been trained, tamed, prepared to never offend. And yet, you still catch the traces. Because electricity leaves fingerprints, even in a white glove world. In a far room, there's a decommissioned rack being wiped down. A tech uses a cloth and alcohol, muttering, for a million users trusted this thing. Smells like a laptop fan in August. You walk past. He's right. It smells like coffee breaks and overtime, keyboard oil and resolve, shared passwords and forgotten dreams. You pass an emergency power supply room. It's darker, quieter, and warmer. Inside, rows of batteries hum in readiness. The air is thicker. It smells of rubber casings and stored potential, of charge waiting to be released. It smells like patience. Then, the lights flicker. A test begins. The UPS kicks in. The servers don't even flinch. But your nose catches it. Just a puff of heated copper, lithium stretch, and battery breath. A whisper that the system flexed. That power moved briefly. That the electric gods still live here. You exhale slowly. This place is sacred. Not because of its silence, but because of the thousands of tiny, smellable signals that prove it's always awake. You leave the data center into the cold, outside air. It smells of grass and rain and distant exhaust. Natural, ordinary, real, but your shirt still holds the ghost of server breath. Electric breath, cool, dry alert. It stays with you, because some machines are too quiet to hear, but never too quiet to smell. Now you're underground. Not deep, but just far enough below the surface that the world above begins to feel distant. You're in a subway control room, buried beneath the city, where machines never sleep and electricity smells like movement. The door hisses closed behind you. Instantly, the scent shifts. You're hit with a dense cocktail of hot dust, old wiring, metal fatigue, and fried brake pads. Not unpleasant, just honest. You breathe in, and it smells like effort. Constant, grinding effort. This isn't the air of rest or theory. This is the smell of 24/7 infrastructure, of electrons pushed to their limits, of blinking red lights and switches that only ever flip one way. Forward. The walls sweat faintly. Steam pipes hiss somewhere behind the panels. A bank of monitors displays train routes, glowing lines of red, green, and amber. You pass a row of backup batteries. They hum, quietly, confidently. And in the air, the faint sting of lead-acid truth, sharp, slightly sour, a scent that warns without panicking. One of the older circuit panels has its casing off. A repair tech crouches beside it, screwdriver in hand, wearing a mask. Not for viruses, for dust. He mutters, "This one always smells like toast before it dies." You nod. You've heard that before. In one corner, a ventilation fan kicks on. Air cycles through ducts older than most of the people who ride these trains. The scent it carries? Charred concrete, rubber wheels, solder flux, and the low thrum of tired ambition. Because down here, electricity doesn't get to be poetic. It's not starlight or humming laptop cores. It's boots on the ground electricity. Grease-streaked, eyebrows singed. Smells like an engine that won't quit. You stand near the control boards and breathe through your mouth, just for a moment, then switch back to your nose. Because it's all here. The burnt paper tang of old wiring schematics taped to the wall. The acrid whisper of a resistor under too much stress. The dry bark of ancient breakers that still somehow click like clockwork. And beneath it all, always, motion. This place smells like movement frozen in preparation. The moment before a train screeches in. The instant after it pulls away. The heartbeat between volts. Historians still argue whether systems like this are relics of a slower past or miraculous machines that deserve reverence. But here, underground, there's no question. This is sacred tech. And its scent? As holy as any candle. You follow a dimly lit corridor toward the signal relay room. The smell changes. Now it's old copper, oilcloth insulation, and humid rust. The smell of the bones of the system. The forgotten tendons of modern life. You run a finger across the conduit. It comes back gray. Not dirty, just electrically seasoned. A sticker on a junction box reads, "Smells funny? Hit the kill switch." There's comfort in that. In knowing your nose still has a job. In trusting your senses when everything else runs on code. You step out of the room and into the edge of the platform. A train blurs past, then slows. Doors open. People shuffle in and out. Some with headphones. Some with blank stares. None of them notice. But you do. The air that bursts from the tunnel smells like brake dust and transformer heat, like static-charged wind and the occasional ghost of a snack wrapper melted on a rail. You smile, because it's exactly what it should be. It smells like motion that hasn't stopped in a century. You step onto the train, sit by the window, and close your eyes. The lights flicker slightly overhead. The AC purrs. You catch a note of overworked fan motor, followed by that specific subway smell, oil, metal, and low-key existential dread. But more than that, you smell function. Down here, everything smells like work that matters. Not glamorous, not polished, but real, felt in the lungs, understood in the gut. You lean back as the train pulls away, and in the dark tunnel, lit by occasional flashes of emergency light and the rhythmic clatter of ancient speed, Electricity isn't just powering motion. It's perfuming memory. And now, you're back home. Not the modern part of home, the silent part with smart speakers and hidden cords. No, you're in that one room you never really updated. The one where the old things live. The humming things. The ones with buttons and fans and smell. You flick on a lamp. The filament inside glows orange before settling. You catch that brief, toasty scent, the breath of resistance. Beside it, your old stereo rests under a slight layer of dust. You push play on a cassette deck. There's a click, a soft hum, and then that wonderful, slow fade-in of worn magnetic tape. The music is secondary. What you're really here for is the smell. Warm plastic, stale paper liner, and a hint of copper oxide. It smells like high school, like slow weekends, like falling asleep with the fan blowing and the stereo playing something sad, but just soft enough to dream through. You wanted the room. Each corner is a memory capsule, wrapped in its own subtle perfume. That drawer of old chargers, tangled plastic, metal fatigue, and phantom heat. The vinyl player, wood polish, and stylus grease. The surge protector with too many plugs, dust, electricity, and a scent best described as do not touch. You sit down in the creaky chair and boot up your old laptop. You didn't need to. You just wanted to hear the fan spin again. It struggles, rattles, then smooths out. And there it is. Burn air. Dead pixels. Hope. Your cat hops onto your lap and sniffs the machine. It blinks at the screen, unimpressed. But you know it smells it too. That subtle exhale of electronic warmth, like a sigh from the past. You reach behind the monitor to adjust the power cable and feel a slight warmth. That kind of warmth that smells like don't do that again if it gets any hotter. You stop, smile, then open a browser window that takes 3 tries to load. No rush. The scent alone is worth it. You lean back. Above, the ceiling fan creaks as it spins. Not new, not fast, but reliable. It smells like wooden blades, motor oil, and long naps. You look around the room, at every device still clinging to the edge of obsolescence. Each one still humming, still breathing, still smelling. Historians still argue whether we'll miss machines when they vanish into silence. Whether the air of tomorrow, scrubbed and polished, will feel less human without these quiet scents of labor. But you already know, because now, as the old stereo fades into tape hiss and a laptop fan purrs like it's trying to stay alive, you realize this truth. Electricity always leaves a trace. A warmth, a smell, a warning, a memory, a perfume of the present, even when it burns out. You close the laptop, you kill the lamp, and in the dark, as your eyes adjust, you take one final breath. Faint ozone, drowsy heat, and the ghost of effort. So now here you are, back in your room, or your bed, or wherever this little story found you. Maybe your screen has dimmed. Maybe you're already half asleep. That's good. That's exactly what this was for. Let everything soften now. Let the machines grow quiet. Let the electricity settle. You're safe. You're still. And the scent of memory is fading like steam on glass. No more buzz of circuits. No more flicker of tired lights. Just the faintest echo of the things we once made. Things that worked hard, glowed softly, and left just enough of themselves in the air to remind us. They were here, and so were you. Maybe tonight you'll dream of humming towers and ancient keyboards, of flickering CRTs and the warm belly of a tape deck. Or maybe nothing at all, just darkness, just breath, just rest. Let the static in your thoughts settle. Let the voltage drop to 0. And if you still smell a little something, that's okay. It means you remembered. Now exhale. Ease down. Let the fan slow. Let the lights fade. The system is safe. The charge is stable. The night is yours. Sweet dreams.